Jakub, you can start.
Okay, thank you, Jora. Բարև բոլորիդ, Քրիստոս արյավ իմերելոց, շնորհավոր Սուրբ Զադիկ. And thank you, Jora. Jora Manucharyan is our technical expert, and he's actually also the president of the Research for Armenian Architecture organization. And that group, that team actually has done a tremendous job in collecting all kinds of data on the monuments, on churches, on all the heritage, Armenian heritage in all of the Western Armenia, Artsakh, and even Armenia. And you can actually visit their website and help them do more, especially that now the government of Armenia has actually reduced the funding for their organization. They need help. And also, of course, the ARPA Institutes needs your help. We do our activities in Armenia by donations only, and we will appreciate any donations from the participants or whoever they know. And we send our notices, our announcements by emails. So if we don't have your email address, please put it in the chat room and we will send you the announcements after this. And also, if your friends would like to join, please ask them to send us their emails. And you can visit our website, www.arpainstitute.org, and see and read about our activities. But just to give you an idea about what ARPA has done before, is for the last almost 30 years, since 1992, ARPA works in Armenia mainly. The only activities that we organize outside of Armenia is these panel discussions and lectures that we have sometimes monthly, sometimes twice a month. And we invite experts from various fields, and they give presentations related to Armenia or Armenians only. And we have many activities in Armenia. We have an annual invention competition for young scientists, where the young scientists in Armenia and also graduate students can send their inventions, and we send it to experts around the world. They evaluate the inventions, and we decide the best. We give awards to the best. This year, we have slightly modified the invention competition criteria. We're going to make it more focused and also in two steps. The first, we will ask for white papers, and in the second step, we will select the best from those white papers and give a $5,000 award to the first place. We also have a couple of new initiatives. One of them is to establish a clean room in the Alekhanian National Science Lab. This will be, I think, the first clean room of its kind in Armenia. It will be used for experimentation and research. And also, we are trying to establish a quantum technology hub in Armenia. Actually, several experts are now working on a proposal, and we will try to find finance for the proposal and see if we can establish such a center in Armenia. And also, we help the regions, especially those on the Azerbaijan border, the border villages. We help those who have business plans, and we give them funding and also guidance to help them create their businesses and be profitable. In addition to that, we organize, we just started actually this year, the formal organization, but we have organized it in 2017, the first science fair in Armenia. And this year, actually today, this morning in Armenia, the first official science fair was held. And there were, as far as I know, 44 participants from all over Armenia and Yerevan, of course. What the objective is, the best of these projects will be presented in the International Science and Engineering Fair that will be held online this year due to the COVID, but it is held every year in one city, sometimes in Los Angeles, sometimes in the East Coast. And this is the first year when Armenia will be participating, even though Azerbaijan, Turkey, Iran, all the surrounding countries have been participating for the past years, but this year it will be the first for Armenia. And the main objective is, of course, to teach the students to think scientifically, using the scientific method to solve problems, and also help them be more versatile in science and like science. We also work, of course, with many of the institutes of the Academy of Sciences and the universities. We work with the Physical Research Institute, for example. We have given them instrumentation like spectrometers and hypothermia devices and other. And also we work with the Molecular Biology Institute, where we've given a sequencer and also other instrumentation, and also with Chemical Physics Institute and other institutes, and also the universities like the Yerevan State University and the Polytechnic University. And we would like to, of course, do much more. And we are now also working with Alekhanian National Lab, one of the teams there. They work on a radio frequency photomultiplier tube, which has many, many applications. And their experimentation has resulted in a tremendous advancement, which is essentially being able to measure a laser pulse down to a picosecond, which is, according to their expertise, 10 times better than what exists in the world. And so we are trying to help them advance and make it into actual products as well. So if anybody would like to help us do more, as I said, please donate. Go to our website, and there's a link there for donation, and you can donate online, or you can send your checks as well. Of course, we work with the government in cases when the government assistance is needed, especially the Ministry of Education, Science, Culture, and Sports, and also the Ministry of High Technology and Industry. But also we have worked with the Ministry of Health, and our experts work actually individually with the various other ministries trying to help. The ARPA Institute is formed of experts from various fields, and we provide our expertise for whatever help is needed in Armenia, and as much as we can do. And actually our name, it says it all. It's called Analysis, Research, and Planning for Armenia. So that's as much as I can say about the ARPA Institute. And again, I would like to welcome everybody who have been able to attend this panel discussion. And I'm very thankful to this esteemed panelists that we have today. Dr. Mary Papazian, who you know is the president of San Jose State University, Dr. Ani Abramian, who is the Alekhanian National Science Lab director, Dr. Ara Nazarian, who is a medical expert in the Harvard University, and he has been involved with Armenia for quite a while, and Dr. Naira Hovakimian, who is a professor in control systems and automated systems, and also he's been closely involved with many, many projects in Armenia. And also, of course, Dr. Bruce Bohosian, who will be our moderator, and he was as you know, the former president of the American University of Armenia. Bruce Bohosian is a mathematician at University of Tufts, and also he has a secondary appointment as a computer science and physics professor. He co-directs the data analysis program in the School of Arts and Sciences, and he has fellowships from the American Physical Society, named as Distinguished Scholar of Tufts University in 2010, a fellow of the Jonathan Tisch College of Civic Life in 2018, a fellow of Tufts in Data Intensive Studies Center in 2019. He has served as the chair of the Department of Mathematics at Tufts University from 2006 and 2010. And then he has been the research associate professor in Mathematical Sciences Research Group, Thinking Machines Corporation, and also a scientist in the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. Dr. Bohosian's research emphasizes on mathematical models of economics in general and agent-based models of wealth distributions in particular. He has received numerous awards and honors and fellowships. Bruce, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Panosyan. Good afternoon to those of you in the United States. Good evening to those of you in Western Europe, and late evening to those of you in Armenia. My name is Bruce Bohosian. I'll be moderating this panel. Let me begin with a quick administrative note. I would ask all of you to please mute your microphones and keep them muted throughout. Please submit all of your questions using the chat feature of Zoom. We will leave ample time to pose questions to the panelists at the end of the panel discussion. Next, I would like to extend my thanks to the ARPA Institute for conceiving of and hosting this panel discussion about the very important topic of education, science, and technology in Armenia. Before I introduce our panel, let me open with what I thought was an apt quotation from Confucius, who once said, "Education breeds confidence, confidence breeds hope, hope breeds peace." And I think we might agree that today's Armenia needs more of all three, of confidence, hope, and peace. So where do we stand with education, science, and technology in Armenia? To address these questions, we have assembled a panel of 4 experts in education, science, and technology, all of whom come at this topic from different angles, different life experiences, different expertise, and different kinds of engagement with Armenia. I hope that this panel will address these issues frankly and constructively. Let me say a few words about process. We have met twice in the last few weeks to distill this topic into a set of questions which I will pose to the panelists today. Our discussion for each question will be led off by one of the panelists and then open up to all of them. I first determined a logical order to the questions, and then I asked the panelists which question they would like to lead off on. Remarkably, no 2 panelists chose the same question. So that made it easy, and it determined the order in which I will call on people. In the discussion, I would prefer that we focus on the future and what we need to do to fix these problems, hopefully in the nearest term possible. I would suggest that we refrain from assigning blame about the current situation, except perhaps to use the lessons learned as a springboard to proposing constructive future activities. So with that in mind, let me now introduce our panel. Dr. Ani Abrahamyan is the Frank M. Freiman Professor of Experimental Nuclear Physics at the University of Notre Dame. She is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the American Physical Society and the National Academy of Sciences of the Republic of Armenia. In April of 2018, she was appointed director of the A.I. Alekhanyan National Science Laboratory, formerly known as the Yerevan Physics Institute. She is the first woman and the first diasporan Armenian to hold that position. She has published over 200 journal articles and is active in numerous national and international advisory committees in nuclear science. She received her BA and PhD degrees from Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. Dr. Naira Hovakimyan is the W. Grafton and Lillian B. Wilkins Professor of Mechanical Science and Engineering and the inaugural director of the Intelligent Robotics Laboratory at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She is a fellow of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics and the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, the IEEE, and she has received numerous other awards. She has co-authored 2 books, has 11 patents, and more than 450 journal articles. She received her MS degree in theoretical mechanics and applied mathematics from Yerevan State University and her PhD in physics and mathematics from the Institute of Applied Mathematics of the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow. Dr. Aram Nazarian is Associate Professor of Orthopedic Surgery at Harvard Medical School. He is the Vice Chair of Research Affairs at the Carl J. Shapiro Department of Orthopedic Surgery and Director of the Musculoskeletal Translational Innovation Initiative at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston. He has authored 2 books, has more than 15 patents, and over 150 journal articles. He has co-founded 5 startup companies and serves on the editorial boards of 2 major scientific journals. Dr. Miri Papazian has served as president of San Jose State University, which is Silicon Valley's public university, since July of 2016. She has led that university through a 10-year strategic planning process and developed its interdisciplinary science building as part of a planned science park there. She writes and speaks frequently about issues of higher education, including state and federal budget matters related to higher education. Prior to coming to San Jose State, she served as president of Southern Connecticut State University for 5 years, during which time she established the vision for their first comprehensive philanthropic campaign and opened a new academic laboratory and science building. Prior to that, she was provost and senior vice president at Lehman College at the City University of New York, dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Montclair State University in New Jersey, and associate dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan. Please understand that all of the above are very abbreviated biographical sketches. If I were to give the full list of honors and qualifications, we might spend the rest of our time doing only that. We are also very honored today to have Deputy Minister of Education, Science, Culture, and Sport, Karen Tertrunyan, in the audience today. And we also have Mr. Aram Pakhchanyan, Chairman of the Board at IP Foundation, Vice President at ABI Digital Intelligence, and President of the Armenian Association of Independent Schools. After our panelists have concluded, and before we address the audience questions, we will give both of these gentlemen an opportunity to share their thoughts. So without ado, let me move on to the first question. Let's begin by trying to imagine what an ideally functioning system would look like. It is sometimes said that education, and higher education in particular, is more than just a collection of institutions working independently. It rather depends on an ecosystem of interdependent institutions, including government, national laboratories, industry, universities, and even primary and secondary schools, all acting coherently and interacting with one another in a constructive fashion in a very delicate minuet. I would like to hear from all of our panelists on this question, but let me begin this one with Professor Ara Nazarian. Professor Nazarian, I know that you have thought hard about what a scientific ecosystem in Armenia would look like, especially with regard to biotech. I also know that you have a great deal of experience in working with Armenian governmental, educational, and industrial institutions. During just the first few days of last fall's war, you and others organized large shipments of medical equipment from Boston to Armenia on very short notice. I think you have a pretty good picture, both of the current reality and how that reality could be improved. So from your perspective, what are the essential ingredients in a successful higher educational ecosystem? What parts can Armenia do well now, and what parts need improvement?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bruce. I would like to thank ARPA for this opportunity, and my esteemed colleagues on this panel, our distinguished guests, and my fellow Armenians. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and it's something that I have thought about for many, many years, and have tried to do my small part of whatever I can to help the process and to help Armenia in this endeavor. I mean, at the end of the day, what I would like to do is I would like to sort of, and again, not going down the path of assigning blames, but to establishing the problems as I see them, and then what we can do in terms of a collective approach to address these issues. So I'll start by saying that in 1991, sort of stopped the prowess and ground to halt the progress of Armenia's academic and research enterprises. And this was mostly by design. So both Soviet Union and the US saw to it that there was advantages to throttling down the scientific output and know-how of these newly independent states. And so this is sort of a major disadvantage. And also Armenia was dealt a further blow by its lack of natural resources, the earthquake, the Artsakh war, closed borders by two enemy nations, and a border open with a friendly nation that did not have and still does not have the best international standing in the world. So, I mean, all of these sort of culminated into a rather difficult situation for a young country to sort of get on its feet. And so to say that Armenia has had to deal with a lot of adversity is certainly an understatement. Yet, one of the things that has been bothersome is that we learned much of the superficial and sort of the artificial values of the West, and have sort of failed to learn the hard lessons of how to build a nation based on inclusive political and economic institutions. And here we are 30 years later, we continue down this path and face these realities. So this is something that, we all share. This is, you want to call it blame, but this is something that we all share as Armenians, and it's incumbent upon us to do something about it. In terms of going back to the scientific component, Dr. Vannevar Bush was the scientific advisor to President Roosevelt, which back in the day authored a report titled "Science: The Endless Frontier." And this was in response to President Roosevelt's question on how science and technology sort of could best be applied to benefit the nation's health, economic prosperity, and national security following World War II. So 75 years later, the Armenian nation must answer these same questions. Significant investments and well thought out plans are called to usher in an era of science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. I mean, this will educate and sort of engage our brightest minds, develop technological, biomedical, and artistic breakthroughs and expressions, and propel Armenia's economic and military might and its standing in the world. These are all lofty ideas, great things, but the work, this is not unique to us. Previous success stories abound, be it Singapore, South Korea, Israel, or Ireland, all with different opportunities and threats, national characters, and regional and international constraints and advantages than Armenia. but all that had unified sort of in the desire to turn a new page in their own respective difficult histories and to achieve a level of economic prosperity and sovereignty. So in order for us to forge ahead, we need to better understand the existing foundations to build upon. There's a strong history of higher education, an extremely high rate of literacy in Armenia as one of the positive effects of the Soviet years. There are a number of public and private universities of higher education and national academies devoted to science, with the former Yerevan Physics Institute as the sort of the crown jewel of the Armenian scientific prowess of those yesteryears. Unfortunately, as we know, the last 30 years have not been kind to our higher education institutions in Armenia. Government funding has been insufficient, allocating about 0.36% of the GDP to higher education and less than 1% to science, well below international benchmarks. On average, Armenia spends about $1,000 per pupil for primary and secondary educations, whereas international benchmarks are in the $10,000 to $15,000 range. Similarly, Armenia allocates about $2,600 per student in its top 9 ranked institutions of higher learning, 7 of them being public and 2 being private institutions with external sources of funding. So if you remove those 2 private institutions, these number drops to about $1,500 per student for the top 7 public institutions. To put this in perspective, I could quote you some average higher education, expenditure per student for universities ranking from 1 to 10 in the world. That's about $220K. From 11 to 100 ranking, that's about $80K. From 101 to 1,000, that's around $35K. And from 1,001 to 2,000, around $20,000. So as you can see, these numbers, speak for themselves. And while money is not everything, it certainly helps. And our universities are woefully lacking as a result of the unavailability of funding. So that's certainly a major issue. And if you look at the sort of world university rankings, an Armenian institution of higher learning appears first at the rank 2,531, Yerevan State University, followed by the AUA at 3,900, then the Russian Armenian State University at 4,700, medical school at 5,700, and on and on. And astonishingly, the Polytechnic is ranked at 12,840. So these are some staggering numbers to think about, and think about the nation that aims to build its economic success on technological breakthroughs. So it's fair to say that lack of resources, lack of highly trained individuals, and lack of systems level thinking and implementation, and most notably a lack of overarching vision, all contribute to the current state. So I would say this is sort of how I see the problem as to where we are. And going forward, do I have time to spend a few minutes talking about some of the other components, Bruce?
Yes, go for it.
Okay, thank you. So if you look at the World Economic Forum, basically, you will see that the following countries have the best educational systems in the world, starting from number 9, Japan, Barbados and New Zealand, Estonia at number 8, Ireland and Qatar at number 6, Netherlands at 5, Singapore at 4, Belgium and Switzerland at 2, and Finland at number 1. So the predominant features of all of these countries are the presence of inclusive political and economic institutions, competence, and a strong work ethic and value system. Not surprisingly, Estonia, a fellow, post-Soviet nation such as Armenia, appears on this list, where it spends around 4% of its GDP on education based on their 2015 figures. And they basically passed the 1992 Education Act that says that the goal of education is to create favorable conditions for the development of personality, family, and the Estonian nation, to promote the development of ethnic minorities, economic, political, and cultural life in Estonia, and the preservation of nature in the global economic and cultural context, to teach the values of citizenship, and to set up the prerequisites for creating a tradition of lifelong learning nationwide. These values, you can say, are far from, paying bribes to get a university degree or to be placed in an academic institution, or through connections and whatnot. So I would say, these are sort of key fundamentals that are free, and that we could do those should we choose to do so. If you look at our sort of primary and secondary education, we need to allocate somewhere between $5,000 to $10,000 per pupil, be able to, to contribute. looking at about approximately 20% of our population is in the age of 5 to 19 years old. This is somewhere between $290 to $590 million. However, again, just like everything else, money alone will not solve our problems, as we need to bring in some world-class expertise and trained individuals to engage in systems level thinking, develop appropriate educational platforms, and use best practices worldwide and optimize them to local and cultural needs of Armenia and to implement them. And quite honestly, even the significant resources of diaspora might not be enough to fully engage in such a manner, because most of us live in places where most of these problems have been solved to a great degree, to lesser or greater degree. So we would need to use our diaspora resources to engage the KOLs worldwide, to bring in expertise at a level that we can think at a systems level to figure out what can we do to help develop Armenia. And this is not unique to any of these spheres. I mean, we have to think of a 5-year plan that, we come in, we bring in expertise, and we develop a plan as to what needs to happen to make Armenia into a much higher performing academic system. And stick to those 5-year plans. We will have benchmarks, we will have milestones, and regardless of who comes to power and what government we have, we need to follow those rules. And at the end of the 5-year period, or whatever that might be, we should have a period of reassessing what worked, what didn't work, what is the goal for the next 5 years, again, used by world expertise, and to sort of plan based on this. This type of a mindset that, there has to be a systems level thinking and approach in place that can be followed through regardless of who runs the country, who's in charge, and, those values cannot change based on administrations. And all administrations need to be held accountable that they will actually pursue these goals and do what they can to the best of their abilities to make them happen. So I think from a perspective of, building a system, that's fundamental. And looking from our tertiary education system, we're fortunate to have had a strong education and scientific, basis from the Soviet era. And, we've been able to develop a regional hub in the information and communications technology and rely on a, sort of our human capital and build something that, actually produces results. And we have notable economic and, and intellectual contributions from that perspective. We've had things such as, engineering city that has been designed and implemented to connect Armenia to the global value chain in the engineering space. We've developed, Armenian National Engineering Laboratory for all universities engaging training engineers in Armenia. So good things have happened, but I think we need to sort of think at a level that, we need to put all of these together and sort of add the underlying systems level thinking that will allow us to have, a fundamental approach that is based on developing science and innovation hubs, perpetual funding sources, faculty endowments, and sort of infusion of world-class talents that will drive this innovation and productivity. Assuming we had all the money in the world, we couldn't start anything because we will not have the human capital. So bringing that human capital in and of itself would be a fundamental contribution to this process. And we need to think about how best we can best we can do that. Even the diaspora resources are not going to be enough for this. So I think I'm going to stop at this point and we can come back to other points.
Thank you, Professor Nazarian, for those thoughts. Since we're talking about educational ecosystems, President Mary Papazian, as president of Silicon Valley's public university, you sit in what might be one of the most sophisticated technological ecosystems in the world. Can you give us your thoughts on what a good educational technological ecosystem looks like?
Well, thank you, Bruce, and thank you, ARPA, as well for conceiving of this session. And Anna, thank you for setting the frame so well. The challenge is large, but I do think there are some ways that we can begin to make change, and I want to really emphasize that. Bruce, you started the question with really focusing on the ecosystem of interdependent institutions. And if we really pause on that language for a moment, what we see in Armenia, and my first trip to Armenia was in 1974, and I've been many times since. And what we see are many institutions with their own individual histories, some of them very distinguished, going back to the founding of the First Republic. But the reality is, for the most part, these are independent institutions, not interdependent institutions. And they think of themselves for the role they specifically play, rather than how they fit into an ecosystem that is looking to do what Ara described as systems thinking and really achieving the goals of the country more broadly, moving the whole together. Sitting here in the heart of Silicon Valley, we know, and we educate, the largest number of employees for Silicon Valley companies of any other single university. We have an engineering school of 8,000 students, and that doesn't even include computer science. So we see these, we also produce, we started out as a teacher school. So we produce the teachers for the elementary and secondary education, and we work in the lifelong learning space with business and industry to continue to upskill and to reskill as the educational needs change, because technology is always evolving and changing. And so we really see ourselves at the university level as the fulcrum of this ecosystem, reaching down into the primary and secondary grades, but also reaching out into industry to ensure that there is a continuum. So the first point here is that we have to move away from independent thinking to interdependent thinking, and that is the systems approach. And that means that we have to move away from thinking about status, thinking about just our own selves, and see and understand and value what is done at each of these levels. You won't have strong innovators in the science and technology space able to really move the needle in cutting edge research and creative industries if you don't have students at the undergraduate and graduate levels in your universities, and you won't have those students if you haven't attended to this creative, problem-based, critical thinking education in the K through 12. So one doesn't exist without the other, and one isn't better than the other. And I think we've got to move beyond that. So what I'm really focused on is mindset here and values. Understanding the role and the way each element contributes, from early education to secondary to higher ed to industry, et cetera, and valuing each as important, not one by itself as more status than the other. I think it's a very different way of thinking than we often see. And we struggle with that too in the United States and in the diaspora. This isn't just an Armenia challenge. This is a challenge all around. But I think until we can move into that mind, and when we think about problems that we have to solve, the big problems, we think about who should be the partners at the table. How do we come together, not worrying about who gets credit, but about what the solutions might be. We have some strengths in Armenia. We've got some very imaginative spaces where the private sector has come to bear, and I'll use things like the Tumo Center, for example, thinking about secondary, middle and secondary education. Creative, the kids love it because it's exciting. They get to learn in their own pace. They are innovative. They have expert instructors who come. But then what happens is we see this real gap between that energy and creativity, and often what is happening in the secondary schools themselves. So how do we make sure that we create, again, the best learning technologies, the best pedagogical approaches, the kind that align the problem-based systems thinking at the university level with the K through 12 coming forward, and then bringing in industry to partner to align the academic program, bringing in the research institutes to ensure that the best thinking is at the table to address problems. So those are some of the things about really thinking about an ecosystem. And the last thing I'd say is that Bruce, you didn't mention my own academic background, which is I have a PhD in English Renaissance literature. So I come out of the humanities. And the truth is, and many people are surprised by this, in the center of innovation in science and technology, more humanities and social science majors are hired than science and technology majors, because a real ecosystem understands the intersection between science, technology, and the liberal arts. And it's really important to think about how both of those, or all of those, are really brought together in this interdependent ecosystem. And when we educate for science and technology, let's not forget the role that the humanities and the social sciences play in really advancing the critical thinking mind that brings about the kind of inquisitiveness and solutions-based education and values-based education that I think will help move Armenia forward.
Thank you very much, President Papazian. Very interesting insights here. One component of this kind of infrastructure, this kind of ecosystem in the United States that has historically been important is the role of the National Laboratory. I would like to turn next to Professor Ani Abrahamian, who directs the Alikhanyan National Laboratory in Armenia, to give us her perspectives on the role of national laboratories in such an ecosystem and how it relates to education and other parts of the ecosystem.
Thank you very much, Bruce. And I really appreciate the way Ara set up the discussion and Mary took it. But a national laboratory has a different kind of a mission. So it has in its mission and its vision to do outstanding fundamental science, but it also has the wealth and health and the protection of the borders for the people of the country. So the National Laboratory, the National Laboratory at Alikhanyan is a development on the former Yerevan Physics Institute. We still have Yerevan Physics Institute in the education scheme, but now how to do this transition so that it benefits the economy of the country, the health of the country, and sort of productivity level, it all just comes back to the education. Okay, what kind of education? I was not directly involved with the universities in Armenia, but I have interacted with many graduate students and with young scientists. It seems that the education is very strong in theory and computation. So the experimental component, the real hands-on work where people learn how to make mistakes and how to work with state-of-the-art detectors and electronics, that's been absent. So my strategy for Alikhanyan was to say, look, we have these strengths. We have to build on top of those strengths. So the development in quantum physics and applications is an example of that, building on existing strengths that we already have. Also, the operation of the cyclotron, for example. Yes, now that that is working, there are a number of applications that can be made across many disciplines, but that requires a broader interdisciplinary education and exposure all across the board. And I'll just sort of say that a word about the internal interdependence and cooperation. We have learned that, I appreciated Bruce giving us the example of Estonia, and that is repeated in every single case of every former Soviet sort of country that is successful now in research and education and science. And that is because they have overcome the hurdle of this interdependence and cooperation. We did that last year in Armenia as we worked with the Biomolecular Institute, the Chemical Physics Institute of the Academy, and many of the others. In order to make things happen, we had to work together, forced together by the COVID and the closing of the borders. I hope we continue that trend into the future.
Thank you very much, Professor Abrahamian. Professor Naira Hovakimian, you have the advantage of having part of your career both in the East and in the West. And I think you might have some interesting observations on comparing the notion of ecosystem, both as it's understood in the East and the West.
Well, one of the reasons is, first of all, I want to thank ARPA for hosting this nice panel, and I'm honored to be part of this distinguished team of our kind of professors and university presidents and so on. So thank you for having me as a part of this team. And happy Easter to everyone. Christos Christos Hariav Merelots, so Orhnявlini Harchuna Christosi. So regarding my education and my experience in different countries and different places, I would say that one of the reasons that I am today in USA had to do just basically with the level of curiosity that I had during my student years in that Yerevan State University that you see in my virtual background, that I was not able to satisfy, neither in Armenia nor in Moscow. Even though we give some praise to the development of science in Soviet era in Armenia and also in Russia, I would say that for me as a student growing in that time, I always felt that the system is incomplete. And that's maybe one of the reasons why it so easily collapsed. Because I was having questions to my professors and I was never able to get satisfactory answers because either I was directed to look into engineering or I was just given an answer that the application will be in some industry. There was no complete ecosystem. If we had that complete strong ecosystem where I would know why am I proving this theorem, why am I making this assumption, where does it matter, how does it impact, I would have never maybe reached the United States because these were the questions I was asking in Armenia. I couldn't find an answer. I went to Moscow. We're solving this problem just because some famous mathematician said it's an important problem to solve. And when I was trying just to push with my pure scientific curiosity, I was hitting dead walls, even in Moscow. And that's what took me actually to Europe first, where again, I was not able to close all the loops, and only coming to United States, I was able to satisfy my own scientific curiosity completely end to end. I know if I have an idea of a research direction to pursue, for example, today I know how to knock the doors. Should I go to NASA, NSF, or DOD? Should I go to this industry or another industry? Where does it matter? What is the driver of this industry? Where should I get my student? How should I motivate the student, inspire? So that ecosystem thing is very fundamental. And it's very important to understand that you don't get ecosystem by just investing into system development. So if I look into simple NSF, for example, proposal evaluation templates, you always get asked on intellectual merit, broad impact, infrastructure, facilities, and everything. So you invest in people and you invest in the system, and you do both in parallel so that strong people cannot flourish without having the ecosystem, and the ecosystem will die if they don't have the right leaders. So these two problems are highly interconnected. It's a little bit like chicken and egg. And to break that chicken and egg loop, it always comes down to risk taking. That's why I always say that building an ecosystem is very important, but it won't thrive unless you have the right leaders to lead it. Let me cut it short because I know you have lots of other questions.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank the whole panel for their thoughts on this. Again, if you have questions for the panel, please feel free to add them to the chat. Before I go on to the next question, I want to correct an omission I didn't notice among our audience is the Vice Governor of the Central Bank of Armenia, Dr. Nerses Yeritzian. I'd like to acknowledge his presence as well. And at that time, at the end of the questions and before taking the audience questions, if he would like to add his observations, he is very welcome to do so. Let's move on to the second question. And this is one of resources, because in discussing what needs to be done to improve higher education, the question of resources inevitably arises. I noticed that already on the Facebook page for this event, somebody basically answered the question in the title of the event by saying that the answer is money. So how are we going to fund the improvements that are being proposed? I'd like to address that directly here. A bit of personal experience. When I was president of AUA, and I think every university president experiences this, Sometimes faculty members would come and lament that they could accomplish so much more if only they had more resources. And when this happened, I had a standard reply, and I asked them precisely what they would do if they had that money. And sometimes they had a good answer for this, but sometimes they did not. And my point in doing this was that resources do not create dreams. Dreams create resources. If you cannot articulate your dreams and convince others around you that your dreams are worth pursuing, you have a bigger problem than just lack of resources. So it seems to me that discussions like this are important for identifying precisely what we want to do, generating consensus about what we want to do, and then hopefully with that kind of crisp, clear vision, we can begin to go after the money and the resources. So I'd like to pose this question first to President Mary Papazian. President Papazian, you've started and led comprehensive philanthropic campaigns, and as president of a public university, you're also an expert on state and federal budget matters as they relate to higher education. You're also very familiar with the higher educational landscape in Armenia. So please lead us in the following thought experiment. Let's suppose for a moment, hypothetically, and Ara almost said this a few minutes ago, let's suppose for a moment that resources were not an issue in higher education, in Armenian higher education. Let's say that there was a magic anonymous donation of tens of billions of dollars suddenly made available to Armenian higher education tomorrow. Wouldn't that be nice? What current problems would suddenly instantly become solvable? And what current problems would still be difficult or even impossible to solve, even with that kind of money?
Well, first, thank you. And it would be a wonderful problem to have. Let me just start there. Because money does make a difference. Let's not pretend that it doesn't. One can argue about whether you need billions. I think we could probably solve or address a lot of problems with even less than that. But here are some things I think where money can make a difference. And to get specifically to your question. First, it is important, particularly when you're talking about research, development, cutting edge kind of problem solving, you do need facilities that meet the moment. And so there are the needs for modern labs with cutting edge facilities. This also helps attract and keep strong faculty and researchers in both the institutes and the universities who then have the tools they need to pursue the questions that are in front of them. And so you don't start with the equipment. I know of plenty of cases where we bought equipment and computers and they've sat in closets because no one knew how to use them or why they were there. So you really do have to start, as you said, with what is the question? What are the goals? What are we trying to accomplish? When there is that frame, then the dollars can be put to great use. And as I said, facilities matter, equipment matters, all of that is true. I would put a fair amount of that money, frankly, into salaries. You need to pay your researchers, your faculty, your primary and secondary teachers. That all needs to be there. We need to pay people a living wage, a wage that allows them to be successful and not worry about things. That is a challenge in Armenia. Frankly, it's a challenge in the United States at different levels as well. I can tell you that. But I would put money into salaries. People need to have that. Again, it's another way to attract strong talent and to keep talent. It's another way to attract leaders in different research fields who can then develop the next generation of doctoral students, of graduate students, of researchers with industry. I think you can also do things like create spaces for real collaboration, invest in the institutes, invest in strategies for funding in the United States, and I'll go back, it was mentioned, I think, in Ada's first comments, but also in some of my other colleagues' comments. The United States government has actually put a great deal of money behind research and development following World War II and leading up into the, if you will, the Sputnik, catch up with Sputnik kind of moment in the United States, the moonshot. And we saw that really go through areas like DARPA and the national labs. Lawrence Livermore, of course, is one of them. And that really did build Stanford and Berkeley and their engineering programs. This was huge. And so money can go into establishing these kinds of large granting agencies where there are real problems that you prepare proposals for that then are based on the values of collaboration that we spoke of in the last question. So I think all of that is possible with real money. I think you can establish STEM high schools, magnet schools that really focus again on the highest level of secondary science and technology preparation. All of that will make a difference. What you can't buy with money, though, is the actual ability to think in systems ways. You can create an infrastructure that fosters that, but then people have to be able to really bring it to the table themselves. Money can't buy dreams. Money can't, buy goals. So those really have to come first. And that way you're investing in people, and then people will help build and use that money wisely. The last thing you want is a lot of money that goes nowhere with nothing to measure at the end. And the last thing I'd say, even with billions, I want an accountability system, a measurement system, a way to say these are the goals and this is how we've reached them and this is how we spent those dollars. This is the ROI on that, because that builds trust and that allows others to continue to invest when those initial dollars might be spent.
Let me just ask a quick follow-up. Money won't buy those things. What processes will bring those things about then?
Well, I think that has to be a national community commitment that we want, to your point earlier referencing Confucius, if we want confidence, if we want hope, and if we want peace, and if we want a future for Armenia, and it's a shared future with the Armenian nation throughout the world, the diaspora and Armenia together, that has to start first. If that commitment is there, the rest can be built. But we've got to start with that commitment, and seeing all of the folks on this webinar, and I know there's a strong interest in doing that. The question is how. It's going to take courageous leadership. It's going to take the risk-taking that Naira spoke of. It's going to take being willing to fail, because you don't make progress without failing. If you knew all the answers, then you're probably not aspiring high enough. So I think that's there, and I think we just need to harness it. The urgency is now, and I think coming off of the war, we feel this urgency even more desperately.
Thank you very much. Let me turn Professor Ara Nazarian for your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Bruce. Mary, I think, and Ani, I think you both hit the nail right on the head. I mean, money is great, but it's definitely not a substitute for a proper vision, elbow grease, real planning, and execution. And these are the things that, and ultimately, at the end of the day, it goes back to really educating ourselves, our children, and also our adults. I mean, we need to have a change of mindset. And that change of mindset is something that, we almost have to shame one another into this, and then teach our younger generation to grow up with these values so that it becomes internalized. We need to have a strong sense of accountability and consequences for our actions, both as individuals and as a nation. We need to have understanding and balance of personal and societal responsibilities. We need to have strong work ethic, respect for the rule of law, value justice and equity, believe in commitment, believe in a national goal and strategy, and working with one another, not just saying, we'll work with one another, but actually doing that. These are all free. And if we're serious about having a prosperous nation, I think we start with these, and we need to convince ourselves and our people first that there is a reason, there's a value to do this. And we need to articulate and sort of really try to articulate this vision to them, because the Armenian nation is at a pretty low point in at least in my recent memory. And you think about, we've been pretty beaten down lately. So this is about as bad as it has gotten for me as individually in my lifetime. So I would say we need to inspire our people, and we need to give our people a reason to understand that this is not just about Metro Mashdos, Tigran the Great, and this and that. We're not talking about these, you know, figures back in our history. And, you know, this is about now, and this is about what we can do, who are going to be the heroes of this generation, which should be all of us. We don't need to create these, you know, quote unquote heroes, you know, but it needs to be all of us that, you know, everyone has to kind of raise their game. Everybody has to understand that it doesn't get much worse than this. You know, there's only, you know, you can only go up at this point, you know. So I think it's important to understand that and figure out what we need to do to inspire our people, to inspire our youth that we want to do something for them so they have a future in Armenia. They have a bright and prosperous future that they can rely on. They don't need to leave the country to be able to have a decent life, to be able to raise a family. We can do these together in Armenia, but we need to get these fundamental value systems in place in our heads and sell this to ourselves so that we can build on those. And money, you know, you could say, you know, money is an important thing, and it is very important, but there's many, many ways we can get money, you know. And if I'm allowed to sort of just talk about this money part just briefly, if you look at the 2020 sort of Artsakh war, it brought about an unprecedented level of financial contribution by everyone worldwide. You know, the significant effort, there was, you know, this was a significant effort that offered a sort of a glimpse into the financial muscle of the Armenian nation, something we really haven't seen. And if you think about it, it was basically just a drop in a bucket, given its sort of a one-time nature that was in respect to a really extraordinary set of circumstances. Now imagine how far along Armenia and Artsakh would be had a sort of a meaningful recurring contribution had been set up for the past 20, 25 years ago, to have a vision, a concrete system with checks and balances, quality execution, and strict accounting in place with all the transparency so that people see you raise money, exactly what you raise it for, and how you spent this. You know, we settled for sort of this small scale plan with the Armenia plan, with the Armenia Fund, which was embroiled with controversies and, you know, all kinds of issues from the get-go, and it continues to this day. So unfortunately, how do we go about instilling confidence in our people that, you know, they can part with their hard-earned money, that this will turn into real meaningful change for Armenia? And, you know, and we can do a lot better than the $10-20 million a year that we collect through this process. If you look at the sort of the 31 largest Armenian diaspora population centers around the world, I could count about 5.37 million Armenians worldwide. This was based on available data. And then look at the Armenian households in these countries, you know, based on the available census data and using median household incomes per country. Look, you know, if you look at, if every Armenian were to put in 1% of their salary towards a recurring fund every year that goes towards funding resources in Armenia, we would sit at around somewhere between $400 to $700 million a year of recurring income for the country. The Armenian diaspora financial worth is about $37 billion. That's 3 times Armenia's GDP. That's a large, large number. And if we're able to leverage that with a proper action, you can have $500-600 million every year directly going into education in Armenia. You can unburden our state budget to do other things, and you can put this on the shoulders of the diaspora and support. And also within Armenia, you can raise about somewhere between $40 to $60 million a year every year from Armenia, if Armenian citizens put in 1% of their income into this. So there's so many ways we can think about how this process can occur, but the hard work needs to be done up front. The really hard work needs to be done up front to set this up and sell this to our people.
Yeah, I'm hearing the chicken egg metaphor that was mentioned earlier applies to this as well, with dreams and resources. Professor Ani Abrahamian, you direct a large laboratory there. You deal with large budgets. You pay salaries there. Please give us your perspectives on the whole issue of resources, what you can do with them, what you can't do with them.
I'll start off by saying, Bruce, referring to a biblical reference. I think it's in the Old Testament where it says, without vision, the people shall perish. And I agree very strongly that we have to develop this vision, and we have to put all our forces into realizing that vision. I have mentioned before that there is, I have met with the former Minister of Science and with the State Science Committee, and this idea of, when I've told them, I said, I don't need money. And they said, you're the first scientist to come and tell us you don't need money. I said, I can raise the money. I have ways to raise the money. I need some permissions. For example, how do you allow scientific equipment to come into Armenia without any hassles, basically, or to send out equipment out of Armenia for repairs without any hassles? That is such an easy, no effort requirement changes that would change everything. And I'm so grateful to ARPA. You've heard from Hago Panosyan how they are helping us create that infrastructure. We have several ideas at Ali Khanyan that have billion-dollar market potential, but I don't have the steps between the basic science and the infrastructure to get it to the market. So that's what I need. I've been trying to build this infrastructure, and even, there are some doubts within Armenia to say, why are you doing this? For example, this, the diaspora medical doctors raised the money for the new cryogen center at Ali Khanyan. And I had lots of people saying, what is a cryogen center good for science? How could you think that this is a science thing? It's nothing. But the point is that they were completely wrong about it being nothing, because it's a part of the infrastructure, not only now to help with the COVID situation, but also to provide Armenia a way to produce technology. We have the capability, we have the idea, we even have patents that cannot be realized because we don't have the supporting infrastructure to get there. What Hago Panosyan mentioned with this ultra high precision measurements of picosecond precision, this has so many applications, from GPS to space physics to medical imaging, all kinds of things. But we need that intermediate support. And also, I've been thinking about how you can make yourself more competitive. And I'm sorry to return to a topic that's been already mentioned, this cooperation and interdependence. Armenia has this incredible IT sector. Scientists in Armenia have been participating in these global large projects by offering to do the analysis, since we don't have the equipment. So we've been using artificial intelligence, machine learning, and developing all kinds of algorithms. So they will let us be a part of this big, huge collaborations. We can be so much more competitive. I've had workshops with something like 20 IT companies. They want to come and sort of the joint collaboration. The scientists could help the IT sector succeed even more so than they do now. And the IT sector can help the scientists be much more competitive in applying for all kinds of European grants. So if we had the money, infinite money, and didn't think about it, I don't think we need the infinite money, but okay, so don't quote me, Ara, don't shoot me. I know I saw your look, but there's so much that we can do. Also without money, by putting our resources together, but I certainly do need the money for infrastructure. So I'll stop talking there. I could go on this topic for a long time. Let me just add that both Google does this at Stanford, and Princeton does this with local IT companies. So universities in the US and Europe have learned from this. And the new president of AUA, who is from Sweden, she was a part of developing such a techno park with IT companies and the university that she comes from. So lots of things are possible, but you have to be encouraged and allowed to do these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to keep circling back to this whole issue of ecosystems, cooperation, infrastructure. This will come up again in a later question. So there is time to return to this. Professor Naira Hovakimian, can you give us your thoughts about resource issue, about what you can do with extra resources, and what are those things you can't do with them?
Okay, sure. I never say no to money. Give me more money, I'll do more. So I'm a professor who always writes proposals and fights for funding. However, infrastructure and facilities are critically important. And I've brought this example a few times. I will repeat it. How, for example, Singapore and some other countries as well created world-class facilities, inviting US professors to compete to spend time there. And with that, having the type of regulatory environment that Armenia has, which still does not have FAA, FDA, and so on, lots of the experimental research can be easily facilitated there. And this is what other countries like Singapore, China, and so on capitalized on it by creating these labs and opportunities for US professors to go and spend time there. As somebody who works in robotics, I can say that we cannot fly, for example, a single drone on campus. All the experiments are limited to the labs. While if you want to solve problems like package delivery and so on, you need to fly outdoors where you don't have the Viken lab to give you sub-millimeter accuracy and precision measurement, and you have to rely on GPS. But I cannot fly a single drone outside. For that, for example, lots of the professors go to China to spend sabbatical. They can go out and fly on campus. It doesn't mean that we're willing to violate the rules. It means that we just need better environment from the regulatory perspective to be able to do more aggressive and realistic experiments. In US, unfortunately, all kinds of rules and regulations are very tight and very conservative. And I understand the precaution and everything, and the whole insurance system. So this is the place when the super developed society with super regulatory, super polished rules is sometimes hurting the aggressive development in science and research. And as an example, I saw these things happening in other countries that were able to gain lots of momentum and build up on the opportunities that they had due to their regulatory system. So from that perspective, as I said, I never say no to money, but money is sometimes a little bit overrated. So you need sometimes facilities, infrastructure, regulatory environment that can be provided by the state. Actually, it's not developed. It's just take advantage of the fact that it's underdeveloped now and capitalize on it to build these world-class facilities. Invite foreign professors to come and spend time, sabbaticals and other long periods to build their research, which quite often happens to be at a slow pace because you are in the United States. A simple thing, for example, like that experiment that I said, if I want to do experiments for drones, package delivery, I need to test people's confidence level and comfort level. We're not going to try it, obviously, around the people, but we can do experiments with virtual reality glasses. Even doing simple experiments with virtual reality glasses requires me to go through IRB approvals, institutional review board approvals. Maybe people feel discomfort, maybe it's too stressful. I am doing interdisciplinary research between engineering and social sciences. I have to create surveys. Even for surveys, I need IRB approvals, because I may ask a question that people may feel uncomfortable. Wow, it has to go through IRB approval. Every simple thing, all this bureaucracy that has to do with the regulatory environment in the country is not there in all these other countries. And the other countries understand it very well and capitalize on it to push some research ahead, to get foreign researchers who want to push their research forward at a faster pace. I have lots of colleagues who go and spend time in China and Singapore just to advance their research by taking advantage of that easy regulatory environment. So that's how much I would add to the discussion. I agree with all the points raised by all the panelists. And again, I never say no to money. If there is funding, I take it.
If I might just gently push back on that a little bit, the need for IRBs and the need for these regulations have arisen gradually from historical abuses. I'm slightly nervous about saying that we can offer Armenia as a place with a weak regulatory environment. Should I be reading
No,
that
it
into
is
your
different
comments?
and communicated certainly differently, right? When these other countries create these labs and invite professors to go and do research there, they basically have an environment that's more supportive of the type of research that we do here. And if I'm testing human subjects with virtual reality glasses for their perception of safety in the presence of drones, there is no danger there. It's virtual reality glasses. People, students, middle-aged people, they have fun. But even to do that, I need IRB approval because, I mean, every simple thing, right? And these things are just much easier to solve right now, at least in Armenia, for example. That's an experimental component of research that Armenia can take advantage of these things. I mean, certainly we have to open parentheses and look down into deeper details. However, it's an advantage that Armenia today has. Turn your disadvantages into advantages. This is something people should be thinking carefully. Wherever we're underdeveloped, there might be advantages there. Just convert it into advantages. So that has to be mindset change to drive the government, to create opportunities for people, to create excitement, to engage people from both ends of the Atlantic. And I don't know, these are my perspectives that I could add to this discussion.
No, I hear you. Yeah, the same sort of weak regulatory environment that allows, for example, extraction industries to come to Armenia and pollute the streams could be used to an advantage in the way that you're saying. I hear what you're saying.
And we don't have to reinvent the wheel here, right? Other countries are doing it. I mean, I know China and Singapore because I had the opportunity to be on a proposal for Singapore, to be in China many, many times. And I see how these things are happening.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very, very much, all panelists. And we can move to the third question. We're going to get a little bit philosophical here for a moment. We'll circle back to these sorts of similar questions next, but a common debate in American universities, and I've certainly heard this debate at Tufts University, is whether universities exist to prepare students for the workplace or whether they exist to create thoughtful and educated individuals with broad training spanning the liberal arts, individuals who are capable of critical thinking, who understand the greatest ideas that humanity has produced to date, and who know how to apply that scholarship to any problem or debate at hand, who know how to take an issue and approach it from 5 different directions, both pro and con, and weigh the advantages and disadvantages. In the modern era, with so much of our public policy set by corporations who have an understandable need for cheap and specialized technical labor, the idea that universities should keep the focus on giving students a classical liberal arts education is frankly under some threat. At the same time, however, technology is progressing so quickly that a student graduating now has no idea what he or she will be working on in 20 years. A bit of history about me, Hago mentioned it briefly. I worked in a tech company in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Though I went from there to academia, I kept in touch with many of my friends who were programmers and software engineers with whom I had worked. By 2005, I noticed that most of them were working on social media. They were working for social media companies. This was remarkable only because in the early 1990s, when I knew them, social media did not exist. Even the term social media did not exist. In other words, when I knew them, they literally had no clue what they were going to be working on 15 years later. In a field that moves that quickly, it can be argued that we need to be teaching students how to think and to think critically, not what to think, as is often said. I want to first toss this question to Professor Nara Hovakimyan. Again, you began your career in Yerevan and Moscow. Today, you're a named chair professor of mechanical science and engineering at the University of Illinois. You have this unique overview of Eastern and Western approaches to higher education. My question to you, am I expecting too much by believing that Armenian University should still strive to give students a classical liberal arts education in addition to a technical education, a STEM education? Given our reality, must everything in Armenia be focused on applications for the foreseeable future? Or given the reality of technology, do we have no choice but to prepare broadly educated and hence highly adaptable scholars? Okay, I'm putting my own spin on that question a little bit, but I will turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you very much. This is one of my favorite questions and topics to talk about it, and I can talk for hours and hours. So we need to have this comprehension that the reality today is very much time varying. If in 80s, for example, I could have written maybe, even in my early days in United States, which was the end of the 20th century, I came here in 98. If I had written a paper for a conference that was, for example, declined in June, I could have resubmitted that same paper for another conference that's in December. Today, it's not going to happen. Why? Because we're living in the time of exponential technologies. If the paper is not accepted today, tomorrow it kind of loses its relevance. What I want to say that the time when we were being trained in strong monodisciplinary sciences like math, physics, chemistry, and so on, that time is kind of over. Today, interdisciplinary thinking is a must requirement for comprehending the reality with its time-varying nature and the role of all the disciplines. That's why, in response to your question, saying that Armenia should focus only on applications or only on fundamental science is actually going to have a negative response from me, no matter how much I hate giving negative responses. I like to be constructive and support all the positive. So if you don't have the whole ecosystem in its place, it's going to collapse. And the ecosystem means we need to have everything. You can't sacrifice the cutting edge for the support of application or technology or industry development. The cutting edge, if it disappears from people's vision and people's ability to interact with it every minute, the people who are doing the technology and the application will remain very limited. The minute they remain very limited in this pace of exponential technology of the fourth industrial revolution, they're just going to die. So in my opinion, if we want to build an ecosystem that's capable of thriving and growing and flourishing and supporting the country's economic development, that ecosystem must have everything end-to-end, from cutting-edge science to commercialization through startup ecosystem, through big industries, and so on. It might be that as we move on with time, the percentages of this distribution in this ecosystem and the roles will change. If you get a big breakthrough in fundamental science, you may want to support it and cut resources from other places. Or when you have great technological advancement that can lead you to having a unicorn, you may want to focus more there. But it doesn't mean that at any point you can bring your percentage for any of these elements in this ecosystem, like cutting edge science, to zero, because then you take it out from people's vision. The people who are capable of this cutting edge science will look for immigration opportunities. What's important to understand also that once we're dealing with building and developing systems, ecosystems, and so on that have to do with people, thinking all the time to come up with a scalable approach that would be applicable across industries, across universities, people, and profession is also a wrong approach. I understand the beauty of having something scalable. It simplifies the job of people who are applying it. However, the minute you deal with people, people are not scalable. People are all different. Research fields are different. Every particular case may require individual in-depth looking and study. That's why I am all in favor of building an ecosystem where everything will have its special role. And I'm open to debates how much today we need to focus on fundamental science, how much we need to focus on application, technology transfer, and so on. But I will never cut out any of these elements. It's like having people without legs or hands. They are not capable of doing everything. They will need additional help. So it's very important to have the ecosystem complete. I am all in favor of that. You're muted, Bruce.
Just noticed, thank you. Thank you very much for your reply. Let me move to President Mary Papazian on this. You did say in response to an earlier question about the importance of, for example, the humanities even for students of STEM fields. Can you talk about that and the breadth of education that you think would be appropriate and desirable for Armenian higher education today?
Yes, thank you. And I speak on this topic actually quite a bit. I think it's a false choice that we should have pure technology education or pure liberal arts education. I think what we want is a continuum of integration. And there was a research project that Google did several years ago. They called it Project Aristotle, of course, going back to the classical philosopher Aristotle. And what they found, they were looking to understand where the most innovative breakthroughs came, what teams produced the best and most innovative solutions to problems. And they found that they had the teams of the pure, high-level scientists alone were not as innovative as the teams that were more diverse and inclusive of different perspectives and experiences. Because different kinds of questions are asked, different kinds of solutions are then found. You do need that expertise in the technical, the high-level technology and science. It's absolutely necessary. But so much of the work that's needed today is really around human-centered design. And you can't have human-centered design if you don't bring a liberal arts perspective to the table as one of the components. It's very necessary. So much of the technology solutions, for example, that build on the pure science and research that is developed, the way you move, to build that center that Ani spoke of earlier from the pure science, which just proceeds to, ask questions and take the science as far as it can, to actually producing something with that is useful and could be monetized and could help improve our lives, can create economic viability and all of those things, comes from the application, which is usually in a human space. And so you need people who understand what communities look like, what society looks like. When you think about aging, for example, there's the technical side of aging, but then there is the societal part of aging and the impact on broader life challenges, political organizations, and you name it. There's also the question of ethics and privacy, and this is going to be a really important piece of STEM going forward. This is why so much regulation in the United States, but lots of criticism in the United States about the lack of concern and interest in privacy in the technological space. And so there's a big fight going on globally around this, but those ethical questions are not built by pure scientists or technologists. They're built, of course, by those who understand, centuries old thinking around, really ethical questions about what it means to be human. And so I really do think it's a continuum. And we find in Silicon Valley, actually, that the student who has graduated with a liberal arts degree but has science knowledge or technology knowledge is a very, very attractive employee for companies. And so if we think about building out the IT infrastructure in Armenia, we're going to want people who both grow out and have familiarity with some of the best science, but also understand the impact that this has and the potential it has and can imagine that. So thinking through that continuum where some are more dominant on the technology and the science side and some on the, if you will, that classical liberal arts side, but nothing is totally pure, nor should it be, or you can't close the circle.
Yeah, I completely understand what you're saying and agree with it. When I vet graduate students in mathematics, one of the first things I check is whether they can write. Because if they don't know some branch of mathematics, I can teach it to them, that's my job. But if they can't write, then I have a bigger problem. I end up rewriting what they write. So let me move to Professor Ada Nazarian on this issue.
Thank you. I think these are, Mary, I think the concept that, we live in a continuum is absolutely right. And this is an area that, just from our own little world that we work in, Everything that we do, we bring it in an environment where we have people that have multiple levels of education in multiple disciplines involved to look at the same problem. Because it's not that all engineers or all physicians or all mathematicians will look at that problem and will come up with the best solution. The combination really is that what brings out the best in everyone, and the interdisciplinary nature of sort of the today's world is fundamental to breaking these barriers in Armenia and really making it understood that, you know, working with one another and stepping out of the silo mentality is the way to do. There is no going back to the previous system. You have to work together. And as part of this continuum, you will need people that have backgrounds in, you know, in humanities and science. I mean, the funny thing was when you were taking graduate students, they used to say for engineering, they wouldn't even look at the English GRE scores. They would just look at the math and the science. And it turns out to be not a very good way to do this, because they can't write. They cannot articulate themselves, no matter how brilliant they are. If you can't tell other people what you're doing, there's a serious disadvantage in this equation. So I think this, the whole picture, and starting from an early age, of the whole picture of developing this, you know, our kids to be able to think non-linearly, to think through sort of problem-solving approaches, to think about not just science, but also to broaden their horizon, because all the little things that they learn, it comes in your mind that, you know, you don't know when you're going to use it for what purpose. But that combination of knowledge that, you know, that it empowers you to take on any challenge, that's the kind of individual you want to develop in the nation. So that, because like Bruce said, I went to school and I learned Fortran 77. How many people write code in Fortran 77 now? You know, but it doesn't matter. You know, you can think through programming, you can think through that, so you can learn a different language. The job isn't to teach that, you know, so the job is to make you think at the global scale. And in my own little, you know, biotech, biomedical world, you know, for every one job that create in our field, there's 8 other jobs that are created that are fundamental to the success of that one job. So to think that in those 8 jobs are not going to be all in science and technology. So to think that, you know, we can just simply sort of bulldoze through a path just for that, it's not going to be conducive for the bigger picture, because you need an environment. Education doesn't happen just in school. You know, you need the school, you need the college, you know, you need the, you know, higher education, you need the incubator space, you need the corporate infrastructure, you need to have the venture capital, you need to have think tanks, you need to have you know, foundations, you know, all of these components come together that allow you to basically develop a, you know, solution to problems, and sort of bring it into and nurture it into these different environments and bring it into fruition. So it really is a culmination of all of these different nodes that work together that results in actionable items that you can, you know, you can execute on. And quite honestly, we as a small nation, we have to be specially, we have a highly homogeneous population. This is great in a sense that we're not going to have a lot of ethnic strifes and problems in the country because it's highly homogeneous, but it's also a problem because we're highly homogeneous. You know, there's lack of diversity. I mean, if you look at the Yerevan State, you know, I'm picking on Polytechnic, but if you look at Polytechnic, 77% of their faculty are graduates of Polytechnic. You know, that's not good. You know, we need to, let's say, if I was me, like if you were going back to the previous question of what would you do if you had money, I would have 200 new endowed chairs in Armenia at various fields of importance and bring in the best talent that we can bring to Armenia. They need not be Armenian. They will love the Armenian hospitality and they will settle and live in Armenia. And by next thing you know, they're Armenian by choice. You know, so you would bring that kind of, bring in new blood, bring in new thinking, you know, like, you know, we need to step out of this. You know, this will be like a great area to help us get through that. And I saw a good question in one of in the chat, but somebody was like, what it would take to get people to come and work in Armenia. Well, the Chinese tried this 1,000 whatever thing, and they try to bring in, like, you know, Chinese, you know, expats to China. And it turns out that the experiment didn't work so well to, you know, pick them from universities in the United States and bring them back to China. So what worked really well is those that straddled both. They would spend half time in US, they would spend half time in China. These folks did significantly better in terms of productivity than those that were plugged in and brought in into this new environment. So these are the kind of things that, we should think about as a small nation, that, we really need to diversify our thinking, diversify our assets and our resources, our human resources as a fundamental component.
Thank you, Professor Nazarian. Professor Ani Abrahamian, can you speak to this as well?
I don't know that there is much left to say, but when I was chair of the physics department here, and in my 30 years or more experience as a physics faculty member at the University of Notre Dame, I often get asked by parents, what can my child do with a physics degree? And I always tell them everything, because physics is like the liberal arts of all the sciences right now. It's the basics of what we need. So I'm on the side of classical education with a strong coupling and in parallel technology and science. I don't think it's a correct thing to say, let's all go to production, let's all do technology, because we don't know what the problems are going to be that we get to solve in the future. So I'm very much on the side of classical education. I appreciate the diversity aspect, and I have talked to many young diaspora scientists that are working all over US and Europe. I've said to them, would you come back to Armenia if we could create your lab for you? And that's always, they're saying, if there is a lab where I can do the research I'm doing, I would very happily come. And this concept of straddling both sides, Ara said that's the most successful, but in Armenia, that culture doesn't exist. It's not appreciated, for example, that I'm straddling both sides. I have a job at a top 20 university in the US, and I'm leading the National Science Laboratory of Armenia. So that cultural shift has to happen, and it hasn't yet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I recently read a book by Michael Lewis on, I'm blanking on the title of it at the moment, but it was about Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, the behavioral scientists who really led the revolution in behavioral economics. And it was interesting to me because it discussed their involvement with Israel in the founding days of Israel in 1948, and how they would come to the United States. They would get positions in departments in the United States. They would go back to the University of Jerusalem, to the Technion, bring those ideas, teach courses there. The next thing they would do is go to another country in Western Europe. They had professorships by the time they became famous at Stanford and the University of British Columbia. They were really citizens of the world. They circulated back and forth. The idea of brain circulation versus brain drain is actually a theme of a book by a former member of the AUA board, Professor Annalise Saxenian, who was the Dean of Information Sciences at University of California, Berkeley. And it's a very interesting idea. It's a compelling idea. And I did notice it in this book, that it was definitely practiced in the early days of Israel after independence there. Let's move on.
Bruce, if I may, just really as a follow-up to that comment, we actually do see that with Armenia and IT. I just want to say that it's on a small level still, but I see it because I meet a lot of Armenians from Hayastan working in the IT space who spend part of their time in Armenia and part of their time here in Silicon Valley. So we're starting to see some of that, again, trying to have some time here where they're building and developing and creating the partnerships that they need, but also some time in Armenia. So that may not exist yet in the research space, but it is emerging on the IT and technology space.
Yeah, it's an interesting model to study. It doesn't always work, but I'm glad to hear that you observe it increasing, on the increase. For the fourth question, I'd like to return to the fact that there are nearly 60 universities in Armenia now, and the whole question about possibly consolidating these, this comes up because a few days ago, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan announced plans for an academic city in Armenia. It was in the press just within the last week, to be funded by selling real estate that is held by universities in Yerevan. It has to be said, this is not a new idea. At various times, past governments have discussed a similar idea. Various foundations have discussed this idea, and I've heard President Armen Sarkisyan discuss this idea as well. So it clearly is an idea that's in circulation there. I'd like to explore this a little bit. It's interesting, in US academics, one of the easiest things to get hold of is talent. If my department at Tufts University announces one position opening, we'll get on the order of 200 qualified applications for the position. The hardest thing in a US, well, certainly from my experience, one of the hardest things to get in a US university is space. If you want to start a new center or institute and you need a block of offices to do it, well, good luck to you. When I was at AUA, I found a world that was sort of turned on its head in this respect from the one that I knew. When space was needed, we could usually find space. There's many beautiful new buildings in Armenia that house branches of the government, laboratories, and parts of universities. One of the most difficult things to find was qualified research active faculty who could juggle high quality teaching and high quality research at the same time. Shiny buildings are wonderful, and modern laboratory facilities are without doubt essential. There's no question about that. I understand that new buildings motivate students, they inspire students, they inspire faculty, but I feel that it's really qualified people, faculty and staff both, that make a university great. And so this brings us back to the academic city idea. Is this a consolidation that will make Armenian higher education more modern and efficient? Or is it falling into the trap of assuming that universities will become great if they just have nice new buildings? Professor Ani Abrahamyan, you're the director of the Alikhanyan National Laboratory. It sits on a pretty nice piece of real estate off of Halabyan Street in Yerevan, if I remember correctly, overlooking the Harazdan Zor. Have you had experience with this idea? Have you thought of selling parts of the real estate in order to fund expansion projects, building projects, or moving elsewhere? What are your thoughts about the suggestion that was made by the Prime Minister?
Thank you, Bruce. You may not know that my strategy before coming to assume this directorship at Alikhanyan was to try and convert the Alikhanyan space into an innovation corridor. I was thinking that we will not sell any of the properties. Selling could be somewhat dangerous, but I did want to bring other science institutes in close proximity so we could enhance the collaboration. And that, I think, is very important, to be near each other for that collaboration. I'm a little worried about this new plan that we will do one before the other. So if we sell all these buildings before we provide where the existing science centers will go, that will do much more damage. It will destroy the continuity of already very strong scientific research areas. So we must do it at the same time. We must create the space for the new that we want to do. And at the same time, we have to be careful not to sort of gut institutes that already have a whole culture and climate built around them. So you and Ara Nazarian and I we have developed this World Bank proposal the idea is to enhance, basically to make something where the sum of the total is larger than the parts. We must do it in very small scale as well as the very large scale. I'm just a little worried that we just do a sell-off and then what will happen to the institutes that were there. I think we have to do it carefully. I do think there is much room for efficiency all across the board. With Ali Khanyan, we have many proposals. People want to come and especially, defense-related research and so on. The property is just perfect to be next to scientists and accelerators, but we always have to think, what are you gaining? Is it just the property? I don't want, I had said we won't sell any of the Ali Khanyan property. It's 36 hectares. It's 78 buildings, out of which are used about 10 regularly. So sustainability was never a part of the Soviet construction plans. So these buildings are just decaying and breaking down. So the question is, how do you do it and do it well? I wish we had a diaspora team that could advise this process. Although I don't know, perhaps some group has been asked to advise on how to do this.
Yeah, it was new news for me. So
Yeah.
Professor Naira Hovagimian, do you want to comment on this a bit? You're muted at the moment.
So, I mean, it's very hard to talk after Ani talks and puts her perspective after spending time there. I haven't been so long in Armenia. I am, of course, in favor of building a campus town. So I'm a big fan of the concept of campus town, but I can't see the idea of selling the existing buildings. I think that's not the right perspective of looking into building a campus town. And regarding kind of development of this campus town, we certainly need to engage professors and academicians from all abroad, and consolidation, having everything at one place, obviously helps. It supports each other. When you have all kinds of people around you, you get all kinds of feedback, and that teaches people how to use feedback, and that's very important. And I don't have much to add to what Ani said, so I agree with her on everything, every aspect of it.
Yeah, I understand what you're both saying. It's a bit unnerving to sell. There's a time gap that it will take to construct something new.
I mean, there has to be the right perspective of communicating every idea. Even the most brilliant idea, you can fail in communication and ruin so much, but you can put the right perspective that it's a lot more obviously advantageous and meaningful to have this campus town outside. And for example, the central building of the university that I have in my background can become the administration. University Illinois Urbana-Champaign is in the middle of cornfields. The central administrative buildings are in Springfield, right? Where we don't have the big campus, which is the capital of Illinois. We don't have a big campus here. The campus is here. So our building in the center of town in Yerevan can become some administrative building, not a place for classes or research. We want to do it in modern facilities. But here we can have the administration, we can renovate, we can make it suitable, and the administration can flourish itself by getting this whole environment and facilities in the center of town, interact with ministries, with government, and so on in a much easier way. So there are so many other ways of communicating the good ideas instead of ruining it. I mean, it was very painful for me to watch. I don't want to get back to that discussion. So I think it was the wrong move, the way it was communicated. But the idea is kind of having a campus town in Armenia. Sure, it's a dream.
Yeah, it's, Professor Ada Nazarian, your thoughts on this?
I mean, Ani knows where I stand on this. We talked about this for many, many times, and I think the concept of having a campus, a vision, like the vision for the campus that all of us can bring together, people from different disciplines and different backgrounds, and put them in proximity to one another, and even bringing in an environment where you can have the startups to live in that ecosystem next to the academic centers. This will be the dream that I think will propel, sort of that structure that you want to build for Armenia to succeed. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to work in Boston, and I can throw a stone in any direction from my lab and I can hit a major academic institution. Like we always joke about, if I want to do this most exotic experiment, if there's 3 of these devices in the world, I'm sure one of them is within a mile of my lab. So having this level of, and having been a beneficiary of this since my graduate student days, I can't emphasize the importance of having this environment where you put people from different backgrounds next to each other and let them commingle, let them talk to one another. The amount of good that comes out of this is incredible. And I know this is a hard sell in Armenia because we have tunnel vision. Everybody's got their own little, piece of land, property that they stick to it, and they want to have their own sort of chief of their own domain. And I think this really needs to go away if we have any shot in changing this. We really need to start from that, changing the mentality of these, silos that will never talk to each other, will never cooperate with one another, to an approach where we all have to talk to each other. We all have to be next to each other. I mean, the fact that, the amount of resources that you can save. I mean, if you have core facilities that are sitting in the middle of this whole thing, if everyone has access to it, you understand how much, savings and how much leverage you will have with your dollars spent, that everyone will have access to this core infrastructure. Everyone can work together. You can learn from one another. And the number of times that I talk to people, like whether it's an AI guy, completely out of my area of expertise, but I need them for projects. So having someone close by is essential. Talking to somebody that does completely something out of my area of expertise, it just makes things so much easier. It just makes things really, really easier, and forces you to collaborate, and forces you to collaborate with people that ends up in much bigger projects and problem solving components. So I think, and quite honestly, there's a ton of real estate that you can think about how you can utilize and maximize the use of them in Armenia. But I think just not falling into the trap of, seeing some property that some developer has eyes on it and they want to, sell it, that's sort of, you want to stay away from that. And selling first and then asking questions later is a bad idea. Not opposed to selling, but do it right. Figure out what you're going to do. Plan it for the next 20 years. How you're going to expand. Do you have enough room in that same campus for things to expand? And once you've done those calculations and then you come up with, extra inventory, by all means, go for it, but not before that.
Got it.
Bruce, can I interrupt a minute?
Yes.
His Honor, Mr. Karen Terchunyan has to leave. So can we allow him to say a few words before he leaves?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, Karen, please.
Thank you, Hagop, and everybody. It is very nice, this discussion as regarding different, very difficult situation and questions for Armenia. As being in Armenia, it's very, I mean, it's very maybe sometimes easy or difficult, yeah, when you are outside Armenia to speak for Armenia. Because in some cases when we are professors or head of the universities or having positions in US or in any other country outside Armenia, and on my mind it's very difficult, yeah, in the end to understand which model is good for Armenia. I mean, we cannot say which exactly: French, German, US, Russian, Japanese, I don't know, Australia, because if something is working, yeah, till now, it means it was okay. So, but we tried to make differ. I mean, after 1991, we tried to use or to apply different models and made different reforms in education and science, but we didn't went till the end. So then maybe we said, okay, this is enough. We tried another model or we tried another reforms, and it was always getting not till the end. So this is a big problem. Why? Because if we are doing some reform starting, let's say today, it means 10, 20, 30 years we need to go because this is education. It's not like a building. Yeah, we need to build, and after 3 months or I don't know, 2 months, it's ready, we can sell it. So in education, the most conservative part in the world is education people, yeah, in universities or schools. And we need exactly to understand. We need cluster education system. It means engineering city with all together. It means university, companies, everything. We need biotechnology, let's say, cluster. I mean, we need to understand which system is efficient for Armenia, because we are a very small country. And we cannot compare and with US or with, I don't know, France, with Germany, with UK. We will never compete with these type of countries because we will never have this type of money. Because as a scientist also, I understand, yeah, that when we are speaking about big science, yeah, we need money, of course. So we cannot, yeah, just say, okay, we want to develop science in Armenia, but without a concept, or we want to develop education. We need to have a concept exactly. What we need for after 10 or 20 years. What are our main, you know, future skills, future jobs, and from the economic point of view. Because in you know very well, yeah, in US the R&D development and there it's very I mean in US you are ahead of the world for many years. So it's not just words, we see this. But as for example, I heard about, I listened to many different discussions, yeah, here, but I didn't understand finally what we have to do. Because maybe there are a lot of good ideas, but maybe they are not good for Armenian system. Or maybe if they are really good for Armenian system, we need to calculate, to understand, and to see which exactly system we need to establish. Because we have something, we see that it's not working well, yeah, we know this, and in science and in education. But we have to understand, we need to exactly say we are starting from zero doing something, or we need to use this infrastructure and to see how we can promote really, yeah, science-based education, or try to see how to implement all this. Because, you know, we have, for example, in Armenia, we have 4,000 approximately scientists, yeah? But we need to understand that, of course, not all are good or the best ones, yeah? If we say exactly from your point of view, like how in US or in West countries the science is developed or what is really needed. So in Armenia, we can calculate on fingers, yeah, let's say 40 to 50 people maximum from these 4,000 can deliver or can try to do some real science and very very, let's say, highly qualified, highly good science. So, and then if we are really, if we really evaluate this, or if we really knew how to do it, then we need to use these 40, 50 people and try then to work with these 40, 50 people and try to see in which fields there are success stories. We need to focus on these fields, in physics, in biology, in chemistry, or I don't know, in social or humanitarian sciences. The main problem what we are dealing now is that we finally did not distinguish between real science and just science as a hobby, because sometimes real scientists are not distinguished between with scientometric data or published papers, yeah, because there are scientists that are really good in papers, very good professors in universities, but there is no exactly difference, or there is some difference which we do not evaluate. And generally in country, to be being a scientist or a professor or somebody is working in education sector is something that general population does not understand what we are doing. So this is also another, problem that the society has to force, yeah, or the demand must come also from society, that we need science, we need education, we need highly qualified researchers, because this is in need for the country. There are different aspects, and of course with one click we cannot solve all the problems, yeah. And the important thing is to understand really if we are able to do a good science, or if we are just discussing and discussing how to promote science, or to do a science, or to build a scientific infrastructure, to make, I don't know, IT clusters, or to make biotech clusters. Because one thing is to discuss, the other thing is to make exactly good points on time. So if we always will run behind, we need to do everything on time, because always we think that, okay, I have to think how to do it, but the time is going, and if we are not on time, then we are always, not always, but mainly we are losing. And only to make reforms always we can do to make reforms forever, yeah. But we need to understand exactly from governmental point of view, and from society, and from really what we have. Because maybe, for example, I will have a lot of money, yeah. For example, anybody can do a fundraising and bring to Armenia, let's say, $10 billion. But can we invest it in science, and the science can give any or some results? Of course, no. So it's not only a matter of money. We need to understand what we have, because we always speak that we are in good in this, we have all this, but we need to really to evaluate. We need to push this success labs, for example, or institutes in academia, or some university labs. And then if we will have in 5, 7 to 10 years, then we will multiply, yeah, these type of scientists. We will bring young generation, and then they will start to, work in this way. Otherwise, if we just give money and without infrastructure, say, okay, I'm giving money and without any scientific point, just only speaking with money. Because in Armenia, for example, just a moment, there is a question I want to see. If you think that only 40 provide competitive science, why do you then use taxpayers' money to pay the rest? Really measures to take with you. This is the first difference between Western and our mindset to run a country. In this context, most importantly, being candidate to the taxpayers is key for a viable social contract. You know, yes, this is a question because we need to understand what is science for us. Maybe science for me is just, you know, if we say 40, so maybe science for me is to have a very good scientist to publish in normal journals with high impact. For me, this is science. But maybe for many other scientists in different institutes, they say, okay, I don't care about publishing in journals. I have some inventions, that's all. So when I am speaking about 40, I am telling you about science from my point of view and from your point of view with scientometrics. So it means scientist is for publishing papers, because this is the job mainly for scientists, university scientists or academic scientists. But if we are speaking about scientists, what we understand as a scientist, because from our point of view, I mean, generally it is accepted, yeah. So what the scientist is doing. But if we speak only for 40 people, we have no. These 40 people are making some, let's say, points what to do, what to develop, and let's say the others are trying to implement also. It means we cannot say that these 4,000 are not. We don't need to pay. So again. Okay, Ani, I know what you are doing, but very well, yeah. So 400 papers is not only your papers. You need to say that if you take out all the foreigners who are just having, let's say, affiliation with your institute, it will be less. So I am speaking really pure Armenian science, because we need also to understand collaboration is very good. I also collaborate with different countries. I publish with my colleagues. But if we speak only research done in Armenia, only research or done, this is different. You know, we can calculate in different ways. So this is a matter to, you know, that we need to discuss. Collaboration is good, okay. But let's say when we are collaborating, 5,000 scientists are publishing one paper, how to distinguish what was the percentage from Armenian point, from Armenian side, or I don't know any. So this is a very, you know, difficult. And there are always different questions, yeah, regarding raising the money for science or fundraising, why government is not giving the money. Of course, so I know that it is very little, you know, everybody knows, yeah. But for example, I had a question also for me, yeah. If for, let's say next year, 100 times we are increasing money for science, then is it possible to use all this? Of course, no. It's, I mean, again, I'm telling you that we need also to do it step by step. Because, for example, next year, 100 times we're increasing money for science. Do we have enough infrastructure for this? So, I mean, it's, you know, it's very difficult to understand. Always there is also a question that I heard about, or I listened maybe for bringing foreigners to Armenia, yeah, to work in different universities or research institutes. Okay, this is good, but do we have money for this? If we are speaking for a huge amount of, because 10 people, 100 people, 200, it's not enough. I mean, we need really to understand what is our main vision for this. And if we have this vision, then we have to work on this vision and 10 years try to do the same, not every 3 years change our vision.
May I give an answer to, it
Of
may help
course.
you to put things into perspective, right? So
Yes.
the minute you invest in science and you invest significantly, like you are saying, you need maybe an infrastructure to produce a cutting edge science, or maybe one of the many papers becomes not important or so on. The key thing that's lost in this story that you presented is this argument that when you invest in science and you engage, say, 1,000 people over the next 3 years into scientific research, if nothing else, these people's day-to-day job becomes analytical thinking. Day-to-day job, they read papers, they think they try to create. In 3 years, you have essentially different society. When that investment is not done, these people are in different jobs that is not challenging their critical thinking. We don't have to measure everything by the output, the paper or the impact or the startup or the dollar economic and so on. The society gets changed when its people are changed. People change when their day-to-day job changes. Creating this day-to-day job environment through scientific research, through analytical thinking, will have its long-term impact. These people, when they are engaged and they don't have the facility infrastructure, but they have the minimum payment to be happy, they will find ways to do it. They will collaborate, and collaboration is very much encouraged. This is how I would think about the issues that you said, because this story I hear not the first time from you. I hear it from other government people. I heard it through these parliament discussions, through prime minister's speeches in Bay Area still last year and so on. If we invest so much in science, what's our benefit in, I don't know, 2-3 years? I wouldn't just bring down everything to economic development. I would think about the society changing when it's people's day-to-day job changes. And the day-to-day job is what defines the person by the end of the day. There is a famous proverb that says you are the average of 5 people you most interact with. So we force people to interact with other people who are engaged in analytical thinking. This is critically important for the country now, especially now, you know, to change their jobs. I can't just emphasize it enough, sorry. And I'll shut up.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's why I said we need to understand when we are investing in science, what is our main vision? Yeah, because if we always will say, okay, I am giving you money and you have to publish, for example, yeah, this is also maybe somebody has this vision. This is not right, but we have to understand this, because society needs to understand what they are when the taxpayers' money are coming to science, what they will get it. Our society is not trying to understand it, or maybe we are not ready for this. On my mind, only, you know, to give money for science, for publishing papers, of course, it's not right.
There has to be holistic vision,
Yeah, but you know, yeah, but it's always, you know, that's why I said we are discussing, and 30 years we are discussing why we need science, you know, but we need to understand exactly, just Arpine Piloyan, what trust
the minute
us.
you invest, you don't discuss why you need science. You work already on science, right? The minute the investment happens.
I think this actually leads very well into the very next question that we have. And so I'd encourage us to sort of move back to that question, because I do think it touches directly on this point. Tertullian, I don't want to interrupt you, but you might, I don't know if you can stay for the next question, but you might, the answer to it might be relevant to what the points that you're making. Yeah, but feel free to finish.
Okay, Arpine, we speak a lot about, you know, money, and you know very well my opinion about it. But for example, you cannot say 100% that if we increase the budget for any institutions, it doesn't matter, your or any. For example, our university, 100 times, and the efficiency will increase 1,000 times. You know, we need to be very careful with this, yeah, because you cannot automatically calculate all this. We need really exactly to see. For example, see, Naira Hovakiman is telling that increase in size, when you are investing in society, for example, also when you are increasing in science. So really, it's we need to understand exactly when we are speaking for increasing money, when we are telling, okay, let's say this year we increased money and there are 2 billion dirhams, yeah, the money for science. Next year it is planned to increase it to 5.5 billions. Okay, with special programs, of course, with, I mean, grants, etc. Yeah, but let's say exactly the vision for development in science. Of course, everybody is telling, okay, there is no any other question that we need science. Of course, it's not a question, but how to develop it? Because we need to understand that Armenia is very small. It's not a part of big Soviet Union with a lot of institutions and big problems. And we were part of it for solving some big questions, scientific ones. Now we are a very small country, but we have a lot of institutions which were a part of big country, and now it's left. Yeah, we are not already a big part, and we are not already this part of big country, and the leftover, I mean, what is left, and is not solving the problems of these big country problems. Now, it was, for example, the many institutes, universities were established during Soviet Union time. And why they were established? Because there was a special and exactly questions raised by the country at that time. Now we don't have this country. What we have now. But the institutions are in the academy or in the university. Universities were built for special amount of students. For example, agrarian university. But now we don't have so many students. The infrastructure is left. For example, Physics Institute, we know, yeah, it was one of the best. It was solving some problems of the Soviet Union times. Now we don't know what was the main aim after 1991 of the Physics Institute, because all the ties were not all, but maybe mainly the problems which were why it was established. Now we have to understand what to do. I mean, you know, it's very difficult to say. We have all this, but we need to see if we are keeping this and developing, or trying to see what is our main, you know, idea for development.
That is
I
the
mean,
big question. Yes,
yeah,
we have to understand and accordingly plan. But I mean, that's for planning, you need experts. So what the government should do is find the real experts, have them develop a plan, and then work on it, and then we will work together to implement it. So I would like to thank you very much for your input, Mr. Deputy Minister, and I would like now to continue with the panel discussion, because the time is getting really late. So I know you have a lot to do, and we don't want to keep you anymore. Thank you very much.
The last one, Ani told about 70. Ani, I know very well. You know, you can log into Scopus and see everything. It's not so difficult. Everybody can log into Scopus or to Web of Science and see what Physics Institute is doing, what other institutions are from academia are, how many documents, for example, in the last 5 years, just last one, yeah, because it's everybody can see. For example, Yerevan State University has more or has at least the same documents published in the last 5 years as the whole Academy of Sciences, for example. I mean, there are a lot of big questions. Okay, you have it, that's good. But what is our vision? Because not only for physics, generally for our science. Because we need to do this, because we don't have only physics, we have a lot of other problems in science. So that's why we need to exactly say, okay, see, for example, you are publishing very good papers. This is excellent, because it's developing Armenia. And then see, we have a very good physics school. But for example, Naira Hovakiman is telling also very good thing, that we need to invest in money, because then in 10 years or 15 years, we will have a generation of critical thinkers, critical thinking generation, and which in future hopefully will bring new ideas or new technologies or new, I don't know, new knowledge. So in any case, we need to understand exactly what we are doing, and with the, of course, all your help, with our very distinguished professors from all over the world, we need to understand how to plan and act very fast because we don't have time.
Yeah, we stand ready to help. I think that was
Yeah.
the purpose of this. And it's very helpful to hear your comments, but I hope that the result of this panel discussion will be something that will be useful for the ministry, and we stand ready to continue communication with you. I think I speak for all of us in saying that. Thank you very, very much for your comments, and
Okay. Thank you very much.
appreciate your presence here today. We weren't quite done with the last question yet. I'd like to give President Papazian a chance to comment on that. And then we can move to the last question, which again, I think might, well, it actually ties many things together. So.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to appreciate the comments that the Deputy Minister just shared. I think these go together actually. And I think when we think about some practical steps, science doesn't exist in a vacuum. Problems aren't small or large. There's no reason Armenia shouldn't work at the global level doing problems. They're a component of it with excellence. So I don't think this has to be a contradiction at all. But this idea, I'm not going to speak to selling properties or not selling properties. That's for those of you in Armenia to decide what makes sense. But I will say that this concept of creating a space where research and innovation can come together, I think there is some real shared interest in this. And this can be a practical thing that is led by the government because it identifies a goal, but that really advances collaboration, creates optimization of the use of dollars, and creates places for synergies. Putting people together in the same physical space doesn't actually make them collaborators. So that's a whole different kind of approach. But I was in, when I was in Hong Kong, right before the pandemic hit, I was taken to the science and technology corridor. Now, Hong Kong is known for finance. They aren't known for science and technology, interestingly. And they decided that they couldn't depend entirely on finance. And so they were going to do something else. And this is where the government led, and they, working with industry, working with universities, and they created a science and technology park, which had room for shared laboratories, that it had room for an incubator and developing business. Armenia does have, and I've seen some of this coming through in the chat, a need and a relevance to working through that financial space as well. Financial services, business acumen in growing these innovative startup companies. How do you actually grow them to be successful and to build the GDP in the country? But I do think this is a way where the government can be practical, but also create that possibility for collaboration. But I would just say this, it's not worth spending any money on this if there's not a vision. And the vision should be very clear. Armenia can't do everything. What does it want to do? Where does it want to be known? And is there a way to build on some of the really good planning work that's already been done? I've been a part of that with a panel through AUA. Others have with FAST and other organizations. There's a lot of this thinking that's going on, but they're all kind of separate. How do we bring all of this together? The Armenian nation is the Armenians, or all who live within Armenia and the Republic, but it is also all of us in the diaspora. In that sense, we're one nation. That's the power of Armenia. And how can we identify 2 or 3 areas where Armenia wants to be strong, that it wants to make its mark on the global scale, that's going to build on these expertise? Is it going to be in some of the technology spaces, in AI, for example, which has been brought up? Is it going to be in biotechnology? We have some real expertise. All of the preliminary work on mRNA technology and vaccine, that was all done as basic science. And suddenly we have now a company led by, somebody who's spent a lot of time in Armenia, in part, right? Founded by a co-founder. And suddenly they're ready to reap a lot of money because they built on, and now they can monetize some real important basic science. So what are the 2 or 3 areas where Armenia wants to be known, where it wants to build on its expertise, where the government can set some of those priorities, incentivize through key funding streams and collaborative approaches, And that work can be done in this research and technology space. So you create an academic village, but remember, most of the universities don't have research labs. They do research in the theoretical space. They don't do it in the practical sense of actually working, places where students can go. That's one of the nice things about Engineering City that I saw when I was there, which is you actually had students there learning as the work was being done. I think there's already some things to build on that can complement each other. And that could be some real leadership on the part of the government, working with the leadership of institutes, universities, and industry, key industries, from the financial side to the IT side, to scientific or biotechnology side. And then you can develop a specific roadmap, and together with that, you build the accountability measures, and you have people applying for specific kinds of projects. But don't think that Armenia can't work on the global scale. I'm convinced it can, but in key, strategic, well-defined areas where it can bring and consolidate the expertise, both within the country and build it, but also globally.
Thank you very much, President Papazian. That actually segues very nicely into our last question. Hagop, do we have time for the last question? May we continue? You're muted. You're
muted.
You're muted.
Still, he can't hear us.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So yeah, I mean, we have no limitation on time as long as people are willing to remain and listen. There's no problem. So
we have the one remaining question, and then I've been recording some of the questions that have come through the chat. Some of them have been answered to some extent.
Yes.
We could then do those.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
One last question, and a bit of personal history behind this. In October 1957, the Soviet Union successfully launched the Sputnik 1 satellite. And it was a very exciting event. The entire world could stand outside at night and watch this bright light pass over their heads every 100 minutes or so. And this little light, coming as it did at the very peak of the Cold War, sent a chill through the halls of power in Washington. It was decided that there was a gap that needed to be filled. The United States needed more scientists, and they needed them immediately. Commissions were created to get more children to become interested in science and to improve scientific education in schools. Now, I was a toddler at the time, and I had no idea how much of an effect this was going to have on my life. But looking back on my career in science and mathematics, I realized that much of it was due to this great push to produce scientists. It was an imperative to produce students and engender interest in young people in science and mathematics in response to this object the size of a basketball orbiting the Earth. The point I'm making here is that when a country is faced with an existential threat, effective political leadership mobilizes the population and makes whatever needs to happen in order to counter the threat. The key word here is leadership. The American response to Sputnik may have started in the White House, but by the time it settled out, every captain of industry, every university president, every high school physics teacher knew exactly what had to be done and what their role would be. There was something called the Physical Sciences Study Commission, and they produced the textbooks that I learned physics from in high school. Well, today Armenia is truly under an existential threat. Under these circumstances, what is the role of leadership in the improvement of Armenian education, science, and technology today? By this, I mean academic leadership, political leadership, and industrial leadership. How do they come together? How do these three kinds of leadership work together to set and implement national priorities? How do they take advantage of the things that we can do now and dream about the next things that we can do? So there is, as Deputy Minister Turchunyan was saying, continuity from where we are now, but seeing what we can build, deciding to do it, and then building it. How do we work together to set national priorities? President Mary Papazian, you have vast experience in academic leadership. You've had roles as a dean, a provost, a president now at 2 universities in the US. Please talk to us about leadership in this context. Is it okay for government and industry to work together with universities to set national priorities? How does that happen? How does it work?
Well, thank you for that question. And I think it's critical, actually, that happened, that these are real partnerships. Leadership has to come, certainly at the universities, with some, these can't be, these have to be earned. There has to be merit here. There has to be, people in leadership who are thinking about how they can partner and be part of the greater whole and collaborate and work together. So I think, that's why it's really important we do a lot of professional development in the pipeline for leadership. But this synergy between government, universities, and industry is really critical. I think that's where we start, and that's really where your question, Bruce, starts. And that's where the success of the United States has been, is when those three come together. I think it's possible in Armenia. It's a small country. People know each other, right? They can come together around this question. And really, the government's role is to set the broad strategic goals. What are we trying to do as a country? Where do we want to go? The government has resources that no one else has. The government can bring down obstacles in a way that no one else can. The government can invest in certain areas to incentivize interest, to incentivize collaboration, because they can set the money, those grants up in a way that requires, for example, collaboration amongst business and industry and the university, or 2 universities from different perspectives to address a problem that advances what that goal is. But here's the key. Once government sets that up, it has to let the institutions develop the strategies. We have something that we care about very deeply in American universities, and it's this concept of academic freedom. And that means giving your experts, your faculty, the room to develop the strategies that will then advance those goals, not telling them what to do. So it's this really important sort of partnership, sweet spot, I think, where real creativity can happen and real results can emerge from it. So I think that's really important. And I think that when that happens, the last piece I want to say, and this is, again, another partnership, this is where your liberal arts folks, your people like me, the English majors, those who know how to tell a story. And I want to go back, and I think it may have been Deputy Minister, you may have mentioned this, that how do you really ensure that the people understand what is happening or why this matters? You have to tell a story. You have to explain what these goals are. You've got to create shared buy-in for the country that this is where we're going, that we're going to become a financial center for the region, for example. And then what does that mean? That we're going to develop expertise in these ways because this aligns with our values. This is part of our needs. This builds on our strengths and our history, and this sets up a future. So the narrative, the storytelling is another piece of it that doesn't get talked about enough. But I think it's really important to think through what that will look like, and then how all the pieces come to bear. It's the 3-legged stool. Without one of the legs, it tips, and ultimately it breaks.
Thank you very much. Leadership perspectives. Professor Ada Nazarian, if you could comment on this.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary. This was on point. So in response to this, and in response to the comments made by Deputy Minister Tertunian, leadership starts from the top in a place like Armenia, which government sort of is the big entity, and government, industry, and academia need to come together. But the fundamental issue is that diaspora has to be a major stakeholder here. We have demonstrated that without diaspora resources, both in academics and in industry, and in the various leadership positions, Armenia will have to work much harder to get to where it needs to go. We are stakeholders in the future of this nation, whether you like it or not. We are Armenian. All of us are Armenian, and diaspora has to have a a significant input into this process. It cannot be just viewed as sort of a cash cow that give money and shut up and don't get involved in anything else. It needs to change. We need to be directly involved. And I will call on Mr. Turchunian and the government to actually take the first step and call and form a committee that we can come together and we can evaluate what needs to happen in this country. We can do this seriously, and we can bring in diaspora expertise, we can bring in non-Armenian expertise to the table that can help address these issues. So yes, let's do this. We don't need to be an expert in everything, but there are a few areas that we can be really good at, and we can make Armenia a wonderful nation building on those steps. I'll give you a small example. From 2014, we did significant work of evaluating the future of biomedical sciences, bioinformatics, and biotechnology in Armenia. We did a lot of work. We talked to a bunch of stakeholders. We came up with a plan. And since 2014, we've been talking to successive governments to help make this a reality and to put this on the agenda. And as part of that was a significant component of making sure Armenia becomes a center for helping medical needs of the developing world, the unmet medical needs of the developing world, a huge market outside of Armenia. And a part of that was actually trauma care, which it came to bear in the past few weeks. So in the past few months. So all of the equipment that I've had to go and talk to every friend that I know in town to collect, to send to Armenia for trauma care for our soldiers, a number of those we had designed with help from people in Armenia, in universities in Armenia. We approached folks that, we can do this in Armenia. We actually built some of them in Armenia for prototypes, that we can do this in Armenia. If we have support, we can make them, and we can be independent, because A, we're at a war, and this is, way back in a few years ago, and B, we're sitting on earthquake fault lines. So we need to be prepared, which we showed how woefully unprepared we were for handling mass casualties. We could have been in a much better situation had this been heated since 2018, 17, when we started talking about it and started doing some things about it. And yeah, so leadership takes effort. Leadership takes, and not saying, oh, we're all only talking. So take the first step, call us all together. Let's do this together, but involve us and leave the academic sort of institutions to be governed by academics, free of any political interference and crony leadership. Put real scientists in charge of academic institutions, form governing bodies based on the best available people worldwide that can advise and can help us move forward. Look at Technion, look at the board of Technion. We can do that. We can match that. I guarantee you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nazarian. Professor Ani Abrahamyan, your thoughts on this?
Yes, thank you, Bruce and Ara. I would say that when we lost the war, I think every Armenian across the globe had a big wound in the heart. I mean, we were all hurt by it, we were upset by it, and just couldn't understand what to do about it. But I love the quote that says, nothing beats success like success. I was thinking, how can Armenia stand up again? Is it over for us? And of course, the answer is it's not over. And there are many disruptive technologies that can really put us ahead of the game. But we have to be willing to do that game. We have to believe in success. And I think we're saying, let's encourage our people. Yes, of course, there's so many possibilities, which are, just like 1 inch away from doable. And we diaspora Armenians, we can help Armenia get there, but Armenians have to believe us, have to trust us, have to help us. I'll stop.
Thank you very much. Professor Nara Hovakimian, it's good that you get the last word here.
Thank you very much. So I'm the only one maybe among the panelists that does not have the formal leadership position. I'm not a director, department head of any place, but from leading my group and leading most likely a successful career in the United States. I would say that the key secret to my leadership is that I was always able to listen to people very well. The way coming from Armenia and moving across the professional ladder in this country, going from visiting scientist positions through postdoc and then reaching University of Illinois was not a trivial path. And when I am asked how did I make it happen, I said I found my mentors very early, and I was very careful while listening to my students very kind of diligently. It's very important to understand your own gaps and communicate very well and be willing to listen and learn and to grow. It's not a shame when I'm a professor and I'm learning something from my students. Today I can say I learn maybe my students more than they learn from me, because all I can share with them is my life experience and the lessons I have learned. But they are much quicker in picking up the new knowledge, going with these exponential technologies, downloading one app after another. They set up my computer, my laptop, my phone, everything. I can't do it at that pace. I have to admit that today I learn from them a lot more than maybe they learn from me. And I guide them on a high level. I mentor them. I show them the ways to communicate, to network, where are the right partnerships, where is the science going, how the science matters in the context of application, and so on. Being willing to learn, listen, and being willing to be mentored, being coachable, it's very important for effective leadership. At least from my position. Let me finish here.
Thank you very much, Professor Hovakimyan. And I'd like at this point to thank all of our panelists for their thoughtful answers to these questions. I'd like to also thank the audience for making it this far. At this time, I would like to give a few minutes each to Mr. Adam Pakhchanyan, the chairman of the board at Ike Foundation School, and also vice governor of the central bank, Nerses Yeritzian, to share their perspectives on the topics of the panel. Mr. Pakhchanyan?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Boysan. I was thinking about the pain in my neck if I would constantly, shake my head in supporting what the former speakers from panelists have been talking about. It's all totally right, and I share all of their visions, and they were not contradictory. They were kind of adding to each other's views, making it more clear what we should do. So I have little to add. I just want to add some few notes from my point of view. First, I want to inform you that there is this movement in Armenia, which is called Gitush, that has its goal to demand and make sure that the government is taking a strategic, approach to science and supporting science financially and organizationally going forward. And the unique moment is that very many organizations, some of them are very far from being scientific, have supported this effort, which means there is in general a good understanding in society about the importance of science. It's a unique moment that we should use, and the government has to use, because there's a consensus now in most of the thinking people that we need to support science, and science is our future. One thing that is constantly missed in many of the discussions in the government is that science is very often seen as a segment of economy all by itself, but it's not a segment. Science has to exist in all of the segments of our economy that we rely upon, that we want to move forward, because there is no movement forwards without science. It has to be clear that without scientific effort, any sector of our economy is doomed. We can't compete globally unless we support our economy with science and with research. That this has to be clear to government. It's not only an issue of just one segment of the large economy. It's an issue of the overall economy in the future. There is very often a discussion about the cost side of things. And very recently, I was listening to one of the government members. I will not name him because that's a shame what he said. But what he said is that science is an expensive luxury. And what I would like to respond to that is that it's an expensive luxury for Armenians to keep their country afloat. It's very easy to just get rid of a country. It's cheaper. Basically, country is an expensive thing. And if we talk about the country in the future, we should think of a concept of creative divide, which is very often discussed now. It's an agenda. There used to be a digital divide, now it's a creative divide. And the countries are becoming like in two different different kinds. One are those that are consuming countries, and those that are creating. And those that are creating are very different from those that are consuming, and you can see it immediately looking at their economies. And this divide is just growing. And Armenia is either amongst the creative countries or is doomed as a country. So we'll not have a country on a map going forward if we are not creating, because otherwise we'll be seen as non-valuable asset and will be exchanged in a political game somewhere in the middle of, different political speculations around the world. We're not going to survive all by ourselves unless we are of value to the world. We create something important. I'm supporting the idea, I'm very supportive of the idea that scientific thinking is very important for the country, especially in the humanities. We know how bad is the liberal arts, humanities, science in comparison to the physics and mathematics in our country. If you look at the publishing, like 95% of internationally published papers are in physics and chemistry and mathematics, and only less than 5% are in humanities, which is a tragedy because the humanities have been suppressed in the Soviet Union, that's true. And since then, there was no significant growth of thinking. And the humanitarian thinking is very important because it gives solutions to our social problems. And most of the decisions that are being made now are not based on critical thinking. They are not based on evidence. They are just based on very subjective understanding of leaders about how to move forward. And this is destroying the society, especially when we move towards the civil country. Well, the civic rights are important when people's voice becomes important, but this voice is not supported by evidence. This voice becomes very dangerous. It can be very subjective and may bring us into more trouble. And the last thing I wanted to say is there is a very good connection, with a clear connection between science and education. Without developed science, there will be no good education in the country. As science sets the level of challenge for education. Without scientists teaching at universities, there will be no good universities. Without good universities, there will be no good teachers. And without them, there will be neither good universities nor developed science. So it's very interconnected. So we really have to look at science as a key for the education and improvement of education going forward, because I'm talking to students at schools on everyday basis. Our problem is that they don't feel challenged because they don't see themselves at the top of knowledge, because there is no such thing, there's not such challenge in the country. Nobody is challenged among the young people to become scientists because they don't see that as a viable path for their future. And that's very dangerous, because then we don't have any ambition, and that's not going to help to grow a generation that will be successful in the world. That's probably what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting, and your comments sort of relate to what Professor Nazarian was saying earlier about connecting with the global value chain. Armenia needs to, I think this is the cultural gap that you were discussing, Armenia needs to contribute to the global value chain. I see it's somebody in the chat mentioned that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So it's a point very, very well taken. Central Bank Vice Governor Yuritsian, are you still here, and do you have comments? There you are. Please go ahead.
The system doesn't allow me to show up my face though, but I hope you hear me.
Yes.
Yes, very well.
Thank you very much for this excellent panel. I also subscribe to all the comments, thoughts, and important words that were expressed by the esteemed panelists. I know most of you. Haven't met Naira, but heard a lot. And we never met with Dr. Papazian. Hopefully we'll see each other next time in Armenia. I want to bring a bit different perspective, because perhaps things that Ara and Mary Papazian mentioned, you mentioned important words: culture, values, storytelling, leadership, but those are unknown concepts for us. Those are words that we can translate, but those are not internalized in Armenia and not institutionalized, which is the most important thing. I'll bring our own example. And for you to give my background, I also chaired the Ali Khanian National Laboratory. I studied the transformation as a minister, led this transformation, which is an excellent example of industry, university kind of collaboration and stewardship. And we have had certain kind of failures down the road. And the problem now, we are also in a process of developing our own strategy, new strategy at the central bank. We face similar problems. For example, we agreed at the top that we strive, as part of our vision, we will strive to become an advanced central bank founded on excellence in research and innovation. The word innovation, people picked up, and we are a very advanced institution in the Armenian context. Everybody recognizes that the central bank is one of the most advanced institutions in the country. But when you dig into the concept of innovation, science is not in the background. People think innovation is doing something new. But most importantly, we couldn't explain, and we are in the process of explaining staff by staff why research is necessary for policymaking. We do research, but we haven't linked research to policymaking ever. And we failed in developing research department at the central bank in several folds, basically. And then we also artificially inserted the word excellence with research to deliver the message that there is no other research than excellent research. It's kind of a luxury. Either you have at the level of excellence or you don't call it research. This is another important message that we have to understand here at the level of policymaking or leadership, as I mentioned. To put an umbrella word for this, which is well-known concept in the West, is governance. What is the overall governance concept for this? In this context, following my own experience in the IT sector, I was in charge of developing the IT sector, engaged in transforming the Ali Khanian Yerfi into a national lab types of concept. The island approach doesn't work. Piecemeal approach doesn't work if you don't have the understanding. You may have a written vision, but is this internalized? Do people own this vision? Can they relate their day-to-day job to the vision? And the problem is, in our country, in Armenia, unfortunately, in the post-Soviet system, when people, vision is one-time thing in people's mind. They don't think that with everyday action, they realize they implement their vision. Whereas vision is kind of a chain of words. You write somewhere, leave it there, publish, you become Western. You put jacket on a stinky body, basically, if you don't have a strategic thinking process in a way. And we as a board started questioning ourselves, heard the word like, I'm also deputy chairman of the board of the central bank, and we decided to invite a couple of experienced board members that are also teaching governance in Western universities to explain us how we could evaluate ourselves. And then they brought this idea of self-evaluation and sharing your strengths and weaknesses with the other board members. Not an outside evaluation, etc., but an open environment where colleagues could sit and discuss the problems, their failures, cases of failures. Fear of failure should be killed in our society. And this is an important, how to say, change and mindset issue that you have to explain those concepts. I think you should put more of efforts in explaining us what in real life, vision, strategy, strategic thinking, even leadership mean in terms of managing the processes. And do you know what this people told us? Another takeaway we had, they say they explained us the concept of free riders. Usually free riders are those that you create value and then they don't but benefit. But they say the free riders are also those that do not harm, but also do not act, but they are present in the room. And this is exactly the case in science. If it exists in the central bank, I'm 100% sure it exists in this science. Like people pretend doing something, they are not harmful. You pay some salary as a pension, but they do nothing. They don't participate. They don't challenge. They are not part of the story. And most importantly, they are not driving through the vision. There's no vision anyway. Therefore, from this perspective, I think the ecosystem or governance, if it's well explained, we should think about benchmarks for the social contract, for the new social contract. Why we use taxpayers' money, how much of those taxpayers' money should be used, and what should be the feedback mechanism to the taxpayers. Through the storytelling, as Dr. Papazian just mentioned, and I have two triggers in my mind I want to share with you. First, these free riders should be defined and eliminated. I don't know how, but there should be a concept. We have to discuss how to get the free riders out. Like when we were discussing with Yuri Oganessian and Ani, how we transformed the Physics Institute, and that triggered the major resistance for the change. We thought that those free riders, if we defined, and it required some kind of thought about that, should be separated. They should be set on a same salary because the government doesn't pay enough pension. They could sit on the same salary that could be a sunk cost in the budget, whereas the additional budget, because the government believed in our narrative and doubled the budget of Ali Khanyan laboratory. And then we could use the rest in paying in a performance-based manner, like to the best scientists or the young scientists, because bringing young blood into the system is a challenge. And the second one, the government or any public money spent should be matched by the private money. For example, Aram mentioned Gitush, I also met them. When I teased them, I said, you have 700 businesses subscribe to the Gitush. Are any of them is ready to put his or her money in the together with the government? You see the huge gap of mistrust. They are happy to spend on R&D themselves, and government lets government spend on the other part of the R&D. They'll pick up good experts, good engineers, but then the science technology concept is eliminated. And that's another important, and I want to conclude on that, there's another misperception on that. People mix engineering with science in Armenia. And for technology or solving problems in the military, etc., engineering is not enough. Engineering is good of adopting technology, but you need science to create technology. And this is another concept that I think people like you should crystallize for the decision makers or leaders in Armenia to pursue the right agenda forward. And thank you again for all your thoughts. I learned a lot today.
May I make one recommendation with regards to the very beginning points that you made? I'm sorry, very brief. You said that some of the words we brought up, culture, vision, and so on, are not internalized. We are just translating those words. Some of these words we can internalize very early with the students if, for example, we mandate membership in professional organizations. Say all the students that get admitted into Polytechnic, the first day, they all get IEEE membership as a bonus. What is IEEE student membership? It's $7 a year or $20 a year. These are all kind of students that are paying for tuition. That $7 or $20 of their annual tuition can be used to grant them this pre-IEEE membership. How will it help? The quality of their junk mail on daily basis will change. Like people who consume junk food versus people who consume healthy food have different diseases and different paradigms about health. Same way, if we elevate the quality of the junk mail, I'm sorry to say, because I delete all those emails that I get daily, but I get 20 emails from IEEE, AIAA, and so on. It will change their scenery, their vision, their strategy. Because in the beginning, they will read. It will take them a while to understand what to read, how to select, and so on. I think it's very important maybe to enforce the professional membership in these societies with students from early stages, American Society of Physics, American Mathematical Society, IEEE, AIAA, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, and so on. If we bring this student membership to them on day one with their admission to all these places, they will start getting quality, a large quantity of emails that will have much higher quality than the other information that they consume in their free time. Information is today something consumable. People consume information all the time, and that impacts their brain, their vision, their paradigms, their lifestyle, their choices they make. And if they start getting all this information about robotics competition, this competition, NASA, Mars challenge, this and that, it will change their vision. There is one way to do it from early stages. My idea, my 2 cents.
Yeah, often what happens if you allow those kinds of memberships is you begin to get student chapters of these organizations.
Exactly.
Universities. It is totally wonderful. I agree.
There are a lot of European organizations as well, which do the same thing. Yes.
I mean, the education in Armenia is mostly paid. They paid, I don't know, a few thousand per year for their annual tuition. The leadership can take a decision to spend the $20 of that annual tuition to grant them that free student membership. And then they start getting these emails, you know, it starts changing their vision. Every day they consume a different information. Information is consumable. We need to understand that. Will elevate the quality of the junk mail that they consume on daily basis. It will elevate.
Let me ask this question though. I think it's important in this context, and I know Bruce wants to wrap us up here, so I'll make it very quick. So the students have this, I think it's a great idea and it's not very expensive. And then they start to think differently and they start to ask questions. Is the faculty and is the leadership of the university ready to respond to that? What do we have to do in terms of partnerships perhaps with faculty and the leadership at Polytechnic or Yerevan State, or you name the university, so that they actually know what to do with that. I mean, we have some really great people, but we haven't necessarily given them that those tools either. And I think that has to be done at the same time, or what you'll create is discouragement, and you'll have people wanting to leave the universities and perhaps even leave Armenia. So that's so it has to be both parts.
We have to train the leadership as well. As I said at University of Illinois, they forced me to take a leadership class, and these leadership classes are polished, they exist. They need to take this leadership class, they need to go through this leadership test. As I said, I went through leadership test that scores 5 of my top leadership talents out of 34 categories mentioned there. And the organization must have dean, provost, all these people mix and match, so that not all of them have the same leadership style, but they are in reality mix and match. Once we enforce this type of training, that we can organize all this because it exists, and we bring this culture to Armenia, that we train the president, the provost, the deans, department heads, everybody through these leadership classes. We bring the students there, immediately will change the culture, the vision, and this is not expensive, you know, this is the easy part to do. Otherwise, sitting doing these panels, I don't think it's gonna help. Who will sit and listen to this 4-hour panel?
But it has to start from kindergarten. All these mentality change, attitude, everything, it has to start from kindergarten, and you have to train the kindergarten teachers first, and then.
I completely agree. That's outreach program. I do hear outreach. I go to kindergartens in Kurbada, believe it or not, with the robots and my PhD students, we go on the demos. So it's called outreach. And it's very important to bring this structure into organizations. It's university, it's Alikhanian Lab or whatever. Even Alikhanian Lab, I think, will need to have an outreach component to it, where they maybe reach kindergarten and show a few nice movies and educate the teachers and the kids, and you go to the high schools and so on. And these are all great experiences. What I enjoy about my job here, that I have so many dimensions to think creatively and bring different components together in my lab and mentor my students and learn from my students all the time.
That's exactly another objective of the science fairs for schools, where local scientists and local engineers can participate, go talk to the students, mentor them, and change their mentality, attitude, and encourage them. So that's the first thing we have done this year. So, well, Bruce, you.
Well, first of all, let me thank all the panelists and thank the audience, thank everybody who spoke. I think it's time that we moved on to the questions that people have been submitting by the chat, and I've been collecting some of those and trying to, there are some that are almost on the same topic. And
maybe just a couple of them will be enough.
Yeah, I'm merging the ones that are on similar topics. So here's what I've got. This one was almost answered a bit in the chat at the beginning. And Ani, I noticed that you were engaged in this to some extent. What is the acceptable amount of funding for you to establish a lab in Armenia and move here for 5 to 10 years to do research as well as teach classes at a university? What does it take to bring an American academic over, I think is, if I'm reading the question correctly.
So I think we can do this differently. For example, if I'm going to move to Armenia, I would need electronics and detectors and just recruit students, and the lecturing I would assume is a part of the whole thing. So on the other hand, lots of nuclear physicists from the US or diaspora Armenians have said to me, I will come to Armenia for 2 months every year, Ani, just invite me. So I'm doing that. I'm preparing part of the Alikhanian properties so that people can stay there for free, and I can provide them an office, a desk, and a computer so that they can interact with our students. So What does it take for me to move? I would need on the order of $1 million to set up a lab with the state-of-the-art detectors and digital electronics. This is the grant we applied for and won a grant from the UK. The idea was that our students could become accustomed with that. It was a university that runs a lot of cyclotrons. So we could do that. So in my case, it would be easier because the cyclotron exists and there's a linear accelerator in Armenia. So I could just go there with the right detectors, electronics, and start working. However, if it's an area where we don't have anything, where there's no, sort of infrastructure that exists, I mean, Tertullian kind of negated this international collaborations, but Armenia has been very competitive. If we watch India joined CERN as an observer 10 years ago. 10 years later, they're selling CERN detectors. So we're developing now an advanced detector laboratory at Ali Khanyan so that our scientists who participate in the Jefferson National Laboratory or the new project at the US on the electron ion collider, they can actually propose things themselves. They can be the lead instead of joining some other institute to do it. So yes, it can all be done at different levels. We can do it at 500,000. We could do it at 1 million. Someone like me to move. The salary is not an issue because you can live pretty well in Armenia for $1,000 a month.
Experimental apparatus sounds like it's one of the first things on your priorities list.
That's right, and I have asked that all scientific equipment not be taxed and be allowed special dispensation in Armenia. There are all different categories you have to apply for it. But,
Naira Hoagimian, the same question was asked of you. If you look carefully through the chat, what does it take? What would it take for Naira to actually carry out projects in Armenia, or are you already doing it? That was the way the question was put.
What would it take me to carry out projects in Armenia? No, I don't do anything. I don't have any scientific collaboration with anybody in Armenia. Unfortunately, no matter how many seminars I did in Armenia, 1,000, every time I go to Armenia, and I go 3-4 times a year, every time I do 3-4 seminars. And zero interest in my work. I'm irrelevant to Armenia, put it this way, and it's very unfortunate because I think Armenia needs me, but they don't have the right leadership there. From my perspective, in Armenia, we do not have the right leadership in my areas of research, and I work in numerous different areas, not in one dimension. We don't have a leader who would be talking to me about my papers, my work. So I did so many seminars, zero questions, zero follow-up email, zero discussion, zero conversation. It's not, unfortunately, the same in other countries, right? Any other country I go, people just get crowded on me. What would it take me then to go there? Find a leadership, create a group. At least I would know that I'm going and talking to this particular professor who is following up my papers, reading my papers, writing papers, citing my papers, and so on. On ResearchGate, thanks God, I can track who has downloaded my papers. Who is downloading my papers? Guess, make the best guess. Turkey, Israel, and others. I have the largest downloads from these countries. In Armenia, nobody has ever downloaded a single of my papers. Nobody has watched any of my talks on YouTube. Nobody cares maybe to be part of my research. So show me interest. It will take me great pleasure for me to collaborate with a group in Armenia, but I don't see this group. That's the answer.
You've said clearly what it would take, and it would take the leadership and the interest there. And that's one of those intangible things that eventually you can get it with money, but not immediately. There were at least 2 questions that had to do with emigration. It's known that educated people in Armenia are trying to leave the country for many reasons, but first of all, due to low salaries and safety concerns. What are your suggestions to keep educated people in the country? A related question, there was a point that what you can do, what you can do so young people don't leave the country. As one young scientist in Armenia, I have a question to that who supports this point. Do you think it's better to stay here and do your best to develop the country, or better to go abroad, work and gain experience and come back? Do you think that by staying here, it's more efficient? We did touch on that a bit, that second question during the panel discussion. Does anybody want to, I'm not going to choose people. Does anybody on the panel want to address the issue of emigration?
I mean, for me, it's more easier, of course, to work here. It's more efficient because I have the lab set up, the postdocs, the students, the sponsors, meetings are happening. Whether I'm here or not here, the research here moves forward always. So I have an ecosystem established. Like I have 18 PhD students, 4 postdocs, undergrads, master students, sponsors, collaborators, everybody's connected, the meetings are organized. When people get into this lab and get out, they get a huge training, working with government, companies, different collaborators, and supervising, mentoring, listening. So for me, to create this ecosystem in Armenia, it's impossible. I can't get Georgia Tech, Stanford, NASA call Armenia to have this type of a lab and meetings all the time. If I get somebody from Armenia here, they will be integrated into this ecosystem, get the right training, and then it's up to Armenia to track them back. If Armenia creates the similar labs in parallel, where these students can go back to Armenia during summer and carry some of this culture, some of this knowledge and science back to Armenia, then Armenia can benefit from that.
Another question, this was also touched on a bit in the discussion. Is it realistic to expect that the Armenian education system can produce cutting-edge professionals in all areas? Should a small country like Armenia focus on providing high-quality base education and let those who can and want to learn the cutting edge do that in countries that are at the cutting edge? Anybody want to
say something about this?
Yes, Ada.
I would say, yes, Armenia is a small nation. We don't need to be a jack of all trades. We don't need to do everything well. We need to pick areas that are strategically important to us and are well thought out as to why we should go through these areas, given our previous history or other considerations, and focus on those and become really good at known areas that we know we can expand on in future. And also we have a lot of talented youth, and those that who want to do something else, they can get educated elsewhere, but we need to create the environment so that at some point they will have a home to come back to Armenia, and they can bring with them their expertise and what they've learned in other places, and bring in fresh thinking, fresh blood, and a fresh approach to things that we need to keep the momentum of scientific sort of discovery and the rigor of the process in Armenia. This will only happen if you have infusion from outside, be it Armenian or non-Armenian. We cannot simply follow with our own institutions in a small place such as Armenia, or any small nation for that matter.
If I can add to that, Bruce, also, I think on the basic education level, K through really undergraduate, I do think Armenia has to be strong across the board, because you want to provide excellent, well-rounded education. So I think that's really critical. But when you start to talk about the graduate education, the research specialties, I agree with Ada, there has to be some choices. And that way the level of excellence can be sustained in a way that contributes to the global needs. The last thing I'd say in terms of leaving Armenia or not, I mean, if everybody left, we wouldn't have an Armenia. So we hope that ultimately there will be an environment where people will feel that they can stay. And I see it really in multifold. I see some people staying in Armenia for both personal and professional reasons, but they can see that there's a vision. There are investments that are meaningful. There's a way to connect to the global community. There are people coming and going all the time, so they don't feel isolated. I think others will come and go, perhaps more based in Armenia, and some perhaps more based outside of Armenia. And some will be primarily outside of Armenia. They may be, diasporans, for example, or colleagues in a discipline in that area or two of real expertise that Armenia has leadership. and we'll go. So I don't think, again, I always think in these continuums, it's just the way my mind works. But I really worry if we're in a position where everybody feels they have to leave. That means there's no hope. That means there's no vision. And that means there's no trust that things will change. And that's where I think the urgency is right now. Even if we're not all the way there, if people see forward momentum and commitment, and they see that merit is supported, that it's not just cronyism, for example, that there are space for new ideas, and they're not told no before they're asked more about how we could support you. I mean, these are things that are very important to sending a message to young people as to whether they see a future in Armenia or any place, by the way, or not.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's a point that is known to behavioral economists that what discourages people more than poverty is inequality. That if people feel as though they're being treated fairly, they're less likely to emigrate, regardless of the net standard of living and differentials in standard of living between where they are and where they might emigrate to. So it's a point very well taken, I think. Another question, there's at least two in this category, has to do with the Armenian government's ability to incentivize non-Armenians to live and work in Armenia. This was, I think, in response to Ara Nazarian's comments. Why doesn't the Armenian government do more to incentivize? I think, let's see. What do you think would be the role of the diaspora in setting up the objective criteria to evaluate the productivity of those groups in perspective of building the new environment? How does that work, that interaction between diasporans who would like to come and help and scientists and academics more generally in Armenia?
Well, probably Ani's in a better place to respond, but I'll offer a thought since the question was asked. I do think it's important, and I picked this up on some of the comments earlier. We're partners in this. We also have things to learn from our colleagues in Armenia who know the culture, who know the history, who know the circumstances. And I think we need some humility on both sides. Diasporans need some humility in terms of anytime you work in a different cultural space. Even if we're Armenian and we grew up in an Armenian environment, we're not working and living in it right now. And I think we need to be really upfront about that and recognize it. And so this is a shared enterprise. If Armenia disappears, to use Ada's description earlier, the diaspora will disappear too. It will just take a little longer, but in a century or two, there will be no diaspora either. Think about the Armenians in Poland in the 16th century. They don't exist anymore. So we both need each other. We need each other badly in ways that sometimes we don't acknowledge. And I think we have to start there. And until we can agree to that, then there'll be resistance on the ideas that come forward. Just because we suggest some things, it does have to be processed and debated through the lens of Armenia itself. There's no question about that. And that push me, pull me, I think ultimately can lead to progress if we recognize that we have a shared interest in this. And this is fundamental. And I don't think we can be successful if we don't start with that place. To the particulars, I'll leave my colleagues who have had a lot more experience working specifically in this space in both Armenia and the diaspora.
We certainly have a strange dynamic going between Armenia and diaspora. There's no question about that. And it's taken us 30 years to get to this point, which is a lot better than 30 years ago, but sure as hell we could do a lot better. I think we really need to make the effort to understand one another and meet each other halfway. And we don't do that. And everyone, sort of, it's kind of we have a sort of a zero-sum approach on both sides to a degree that does not facilitate fundamental understanding that we're the same. We must be pulling the wagon in the same direction together. And I think that's fundamental to kind of to get through our heads from both sides, that we got to do this together.
Yeah, I could just add that while I was not in Armenia, with Yuri Oganessian, as Nerses Yerityan mentioned, he was the Minister of Finance, and I was a part of an international committee of experts to give advice. And actually that advice was taken in Armenia. And, you know, the National Lab of Armenia was created on this basis of something that's more than just a fundamental research institute, just a physics institute. I would say that more of my suggestions were taken when I wasn't in Armenia. That's a kind of a system thing, I think. And I tried to make the point that I didn't come from the US to change everything that there was, because I came from the US out of respect for the science and the progress of the past. The Yerevan Physics Institute was inspirational to me as a kid for science. But then to make suggestions is always treated as, we're a small country, we're not the US, you know, you had it easy, so you got $160 million in research grants because in the US they just hand it out on trees, and, you know, you can't pay people professional salaries because, you know, that's so much higher than everybody else, that kind of thing. But you see, I needed to go to a fundamentally and completely Armenian institution and work within that institution. I think in 3 years, I've developed some understanding of how things work in Armenia. And I think the people of Alikhanyan have developed some understanding of where I'm coming from. I'm still working on the government component.
There was one last, sorry?
I think we should wrap it up, Bruce. It's been already 3.5 hours, so.
Yeah, this has been a marathon, and I'm appreciative of the time of the panelists and of the audience. I appreciate the fact that you've stayed with us this long, and thank you very much for your comments and your questions in the chat. I am at this point going to turn it back over to Dr. Panosyan to wrap things up. And the last thing I'd like to do is thank once again the ARPA Institute for conceiving of and hosting this event.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce, and thank you everybody, especially the panelists. This was a really interesting and invigorating discussion, I think. And I hope that it will benefit those that are leaders in Armenia and have the capability and the authority to make decisions. And again, ARPA is always there and ready for any kind of assistance that Armenia needs. So thank you very much. And just one note that we will have another presentation this time by Vahan Zanoyan, who is a petroleum economist. He has some ideas about how the economic development paradigm as a whole should change and be modified in order for Armenia to become a better economically successful country. It will be on April 18th, I'm sorry, 17th, April 17th, Saturday again, at 11 the same time. So you're all welcome, and thank you again, everybody, for staying this long, as Bruce said. And thank you, Bruce, for an excellent moderation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you, and happy Easter.
Happy.
Happy Easter.
Yes, happy Easter.